Chapter 754. The reappearance of the statue was undoubtedly beyond everyone's expectations. Of course, this accident was a pleasant surprise. At least for now. All the believers went crazy, and like a plague, they knelt down and prayed. Some were chanting doctrines, expressing their devout faith. Some were telling their own suffering, hoping to get the blessings of God. Some of them were muttering about their sins in a low voice, begging for forgiveness. Mixed together, there was no sense of clamor. There was only an indescribable solemnity and solemnity. Among them, the great figure of the Temple of Light standing behind the high platform was also shocked. He knelt down, and while talking about his pure faith, he sighed that Vitka had completely profited this time. 2 miracles, and both of them were on Vitka. What this meant was self-evident. Behind the floor-to-ceiling windows inside the church, Owens, who was kneeling on one knee, seemed to be respectful, but his eyes were fixed on the statue floating in the air, and he whispered, "No magic fluctuations, no space ripples, nothing. Is this the Father God?" Oh, one. See. Suppressing her strong dissatisfaction, Sylvia, who was also kneeling on one knee, stared fiercely at him, and said stiffly, one word at a time. There was no doubt that Sylvia's mood was absolutely excited, because she finally saw a miracle with her own eyes, and also confirmed that God really did exist, and not just existed in fantasy. This was undoubtedly a great encouragement for her to strengthen her faith and defeat the dark seed in her heart. So, she naturally couldn't tolerate Owens's blasphemous attitude. It's not a suspicion, well, curious. Curious about the mysterious power of the Father God, he. Now that the statue was in front of him, even if Owens still had doubts in his heart, he naturally couldn't say it out loud. What's more, he was very clear about Sylvia's temper. If he didn't do it right, the other side might really send him to the Inquisition. Seeing that Sylvia's expression was slightly relaxed, Owens hurriedly made a prayer gesture in front of his chest, and his expression was very respectful. Great and benevolent Father God, your devout believer Owens sends you. The words suddenly stopped, but the statue in the air suddenly disappeared, instantly moving from the high platform to the sky outside the church. Then, without waiting for him to react, he continued to teleport, flickering in midair. His movements were ethereal and ghostly, causing the believers below to exclaim from time to time, as if it was a prank. Owens was dumbfounded, and he subconsciously muttered to himself, "Is this the power of the gods? Without any spatial fluctuations, they can teleport?" This was a good explanation, but what happened next was unexplainable. With a final flash, the statue finally stopped in the air above the church. But before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief, a large black shadow suddenly appeared in the air, completely covering the figure of the statue. Then, in front of everyone's eyes, the black shadow turned, and a face that was as big as a pancake appeared in the air. He looked like a little boy with a chubby face stained with dust. There was a long, shiny snot under his nose, about to drip down. He seemed to realize that this was a little indecent, so his nose suddenly opened and closed, and the shiny snot was instantly sucked back. Then, he opened his mouth and smiled happily. A few decayed teeth were clearly visible. The grand scene fell into a deathly silence. Everyone raised their heads and stared dumbfoundedly at the not-so-cute sloppy child. They all lost their voices. At this time, in the crowded crowd outside the church, a strong man in plain clothes scratched his head in confusion and subconsciously pulled a plump ant next to him. "Aunt Belle, is this your butt-face?" "No, I don't know. It seems a little like him." At this point, the scene began to become a little strange. It was not because everyone recognized the sloppy child. Of course, the people who lived nearby would definitely recognize him. But in front of tens of thousands of people, there were many believers who came from afar, so it was insignificant. The reason why it was strange was that everyone knew that the current situation was a little abnormal. The statue of a god was one thing, But what was with the appearance of a sloppy child? Was he the son of God? But this appearance was a little too shabby. While they were puzzled, the farce was still going on. The child who was making a face suddenly disappeared from their sight, as if he had been pushed by someone. Then, the statue appeared again, but in an instant it was covered by a little girl with goat horn braids. Then, the images in the air became a little chaotic. It seemed that the sloppy little boy from before and the little girl with goat horn braids were fighting, tearing at each other, grabbing each other's braids, and pinching each other's faces. The images of the boy, the girl, and the statue appeared one after another, and it was very chaotic. This is a little strange. Owens looked at the chaotic scene in the air in a daze, and his face was full of astonishment. Sylvia's determined expression was also a little shaken. The light in her eyes gradually dimmed, as if she had thought of something. She suddenly turned her head and looked at the roof of the buildings on the left, which had made her feel strange just now. Squinting her eyes, she quickly locked onto a rooftop where people were fighting. Because of the angle, Sylvia, who was standing below, could not see clearly, but Vitka, who was on the high platform, was different. He looked around and saw that on the rooftop, about 4 or 5 short figures were fighting. He then looked up at the images in the air and was stunned, muttering to himself, "God, what the hell is going on?" No one could answer this question, but the chaotic battle in the air had already ended. Because of her early puberty, the little girl became the final winner and occupied all the images by herself. Then, she stroked her messy goat horn braids and smiled proudly. The next moment, a small area of chaos broke out. It was the bottom of the 3-story building. Someone had heard the crying and fighting coming from above, and they squeezed through the crowd, broke through the door, and quickly rushed into the small building. F***ck. Owens's expression changed, and he realized that something was wrong. He rarely swore, and suddenly got up and rushed to the church door. "Get out, something is wrong." Sylvia did not move. She was still kneeling on one knee, looking at the little girl in a daze. Could it be, all of this is fake? In this world, there really is no God. More than 10 seconds later, under Vitka's stupefied gaze, a group of figures rushed to the roof of the 3-story building. Then, the little girl in the air was stunned, as if she was scared. Then, the little girl was lifted up, and a desperate man's face appeared in the air. Hysterical roars echoed, "It's fake! It's all fake! There are no miracles, no gods, we have been deceived! We have been deceived!" Boom! The roars and roars shook the sky. If the crowd below could be described as waves, then now it was the sea under a storm. Anger spewed out, and the waves soared to the sky. Feeling the undisguised anger, Vitka took a few steps back and sat down on the high platform. His face instantly turned pale, and beads of sweat rolled down his face. He didn't know what had happened at all. Why did he become like this when he was fine just now? Could it be that someone was trying to frame him? Yes, it must be like this. Someone was jealous of my luck, so they set me up. Thinking of this, Vitka's face instantly turned red. Like a dying fish struggling on the shore, he quickly jumped up, waved his hands, and shouted with all his might, "This is not real, I was set up, I am the representative of God, I am really." "Damn your representative!" With a loud shout, Owen's figure suddenly appeared on the high platform and knocked Vitka unconscious with a simple chop. But it was all too late. Because of Vitka's roars, the tens of thousands of panicked believers finally found an outlet. "Vitka! It's him! He deceived us! How dare he fake miracles? He must be judged by God! God my ass! Beat him to death! Beat him to death!" Apart from the locals, those who were able to make the journey in just 3 days were naturally true believers. Their faith in the Temple of Light was unquestionable, but because of this, after knowing that they were deceived, everyone went crazy. Extreme emotional disparity created extreme insanity. Boom, boom, boom. Under the crowd, the iron railings, gates, walls, and so on around the church were pushed to the ground in an instant, like a lonely boat in the sea. Then, countless believers with ferocious and distorted faces rushed in crazily. In just a few minutes, the situation was completely reversed. Standing at the back, the important figures of the Temple of Light were completely dumbfounded. Looking at the vast sea of people in front of them, their bodies trembled, and they stood rooted to the ground. There were also some important figures with rich combat experience who subconsciously picked up their staffs and prepared to attack. But in an instant, Owens rushed over like a whirlwind, his spear knocking down the staff, and roared, "Are you King crazy? Do you want to die?" Owens' choice was undoubtedly correct. Not to mention whether or not they could defeat the tens of thousands of people, they could not defeat them. Even if they could, if a clergyman dared to attack a believer, this matter would be completely blown out of proportion, and even the Temple of Light would be implicated. But unfortunately, the problem that Owens realized, some observant people could also realize it. Suddenly, there was an angry roar, "Murder! The Temple of Light is killing people!" Hearing this, Owens suddenly turned his head. In the midst of the crowd, not far away, he saw a big man with bloodstains all over his face lying on his back, screaming miserably. In front of him, the Knight of Light was holding his spear horizontally with a blank face, as if he had not recovered at all. Damn it! Owens looked at the crazier and more resentful eyes of the believers around him, and his heart sank. He knew that this matter was inevitably blown out of proportion. Previously, he felt that there were too many believers this time, as if there was someone secretly behind the scenes. Now, combined with the current situation, everything was clear. Someone wanted to defame the Temple of Light. Of course, even if Owens knew that this was just a conspiracy, now that the public was angry, he could not defend himself and was helpless. Taking a deep breath, he decisively waved his spear and shouted, "Everyone listen to my orders, retreat, 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 all of you retreat." Chapter 755. As mentioned before, Emoma City was destined to be recorded in history, but its reputation would go down in history for thousands of years. Of course, Emoma City was a bit innocent because it was not them who chose Vediga, but Vediga chose them. So it was not an exaggeration to say that when an adult sat at home, disaster would come from the sky. But when tens of thousands of believers who had lost their minds pushed down the church in the city, destroyed countless surrounding buildings, destroyed half of the city, and caused countless casualties, they were destined to be the scapegoat. Moreover, the impact of the situation would not stop because of the damage to the city. Bigger waves were spreading at an extremely fast speed. Although the news about the miracle had only been fermenting for 3 days, it had already spread widely under the propaganda of Vediga and the secret organization. Although it was not known to everyone in the Bran, at least it covered most of the vast northern area. This could be seen from the number of believers that severely blocked Emoma City on the day of Vediga's gospel. It was also because of this foundation that when the news of Emoma City spread out, it set off a storm. The miracle was fake? This was a grand scam that Vediga wrote and directed for his own benefit? If it were not for a few children who inadvertently exposed it, the world would be kept in the dark by him? After Vediga was exposed, not only was he not tried, but he was rescued by the people of the temple, and there were Knights of Light who injured the believers on the spot? Shocking news continued to spread one after another, causing everyone to be dumbstruck. And this was just the beginning. Then all kinds of rumors about Vediga became even more rampant. When Vediga was the bishop of Blue Tile City, he colluded with his accomplices and maliciously harmed the righteous clergy, causing them to be wronged until now. Vediga took advantage of his identity and embezzled countless donations from the believers. There were also rumors that he secretly imprisoned young and beautiful female believers. The news was mostly reasonable, but there were also rumors that were groundless, and it was difficult to distinguish between the truth and the lies. But in any case, Vediga was gradually being demonized, and this was an indisputable fact. If Vediga heard these news, he would definitely cry out for injustice. Yes, the latter part of the story sounded familiar, and he did do a lot of things. But regarding the miracle, he really wasn't faking it. Unfortunately, not to mention that he didn't have the chance to redress his grievances. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to defend himself, because the children at the scene saw the fake props installed by the knights wearing the Temple of Light's armor. Needless to say, this debt must be placed on the heads of Vitega's guards, the 2 brigades of Holy Light Knights. Of course, there were still flaws in this matter that could be found. For example, the knights who installed the fake props knew that there were children watching them, but they didn't chase them away. Instead, they left first, which was a bit unreasonable. In fact, it was not because Tang En was careless. His original plan was to accidentally reveal his identity as a temple knight after the statue appeared. However, this plan was undoubtedly ruined when he saw Sylvia. Tang En felt a little guilty, and in the end, he used Kid to complete the final blow. However, even if they knew this flaw, the Temple of Light was not interested in defending Vitgar, because the temple itself was a little busy with its own affairs. To be honest, this was inevitable. Because Vitega's actions didn't only affect him. Just as Tang En had expected, the firm belief of the believers began to waver. The truth was in front of them. If it wasn't for a freak combination of factors, they definitely wouldn't have known that there were so many secrets behind the miracle. Did this mean that the previous successful miracles were also done in the same way? The only difference was that no one discovered it at that time. It was a very normal association, but it was fatal for the Temple of Light, because for a religion, mystery was an essential part of its existence. It was precisely because of these unattainable and unimaginable mysteries that people felt a sense of worship. Now, regardless of whether the previous miracles of the Temple of Light were fake or not, there was no doubt that they were now regarded with suspicion. Of course, because miracles usually occurred once in 100 years or hundreds of years, it was naturally impossible to verify the authenticity of the miracles in the past. But for Tang En, as long as the believers had doubts in their hearts, it was enough. After all, not every crack could be automatically healed with the passage of time. Moreover, if the previous miracles were to be said to be a blow to the Temple of Light's head, in that case, the rumor that Vitka had done something despicable was to stab the Brilliance Shrine in the heart, killing his colleagues, swallowing donations, keeping female believers in captivity. No matter how one looked at it, it didn't seem like something that could be done seamlessly by just one person. Moreover, if Vitega, the deputy head of the Inquisition, was like this, what about the other clergymen? It was also a normal association, but this association was undoubtedly more realistic. Just as Raymond had said before, the Temple of Light was rotten to the core, and the reason why no one discovered it was because their outer clothes were too dazzling and holy, completely covering the filth inside. But now, with Vitgar's incident, some things that were previously covered up, suppressed, or secretly eliminated gradually began to surface and were exposed to everyone's eyes. Some things were not afraid that no one would ask, but they were afraid that no one would investigate. As long as one had the heart to investigate, they could always find some shocking things. Of course, Tang En wouldn't miss such a great opportunity. With the help of Raymond, who had been a critic of the Temple of Light for more than 10 years, it was easy to throw out a few filthy things that would attract hatred. Then, in just 2 days after the incident in Moma City, there were news that clergymen abused their power and bullied others. Believers' donations were used by a clergyman to secretly raise women, and so on. There was no doubt that these things were absolutely true. Even if there were some deviations, as long as one investigated the clergyman, more or less other filthy things could be found. It had to be said that Tang En's move was a stab to the Temple of Light, and at the same time, to the believers' vital points. The more devout the believers were, the more crazy they would be when they were hurt. No one wanted to see the donations that they had painstakingly saved and donated with both hands, only to be used by these bastards to indulge in debauchery, and even persecute them, taking away their young daughters and beautiful wives. Even if aunts could tolerate this, even uncles couldn't. At this point, the foundation of the Temple of Light's faith had suffered an unprecedented blow. Some clergymen who were found to be problematic had been besieged by believers and killed. Even the church where the incident happened was smashed on the spot by the angry believers. The Temple of Light knew that there was definitely someone behind this, but they were too busy to investigate. Under such pressure, the Temple of Light broke out with unprecedented efficiency. In just 2 days, Vitker was pushed out to accept the trial of the public believers. In fact, according to the doctrine, clergymen who made mistakes were only subject to the internal trial of the temple, and no other organization had the right to interfere. Vitker had inadvertently created a pioneering work this time, and his name was enough to be remembered in history. Of course, he himself didn't think so. There was no doubt about the result of the trial. Vitker was tied to a stake and burned alive on the spot. According to the consistent saying of the Temple of Light, people who were burned to death didn't have souls. Not to mention returning to the arms of the God of Light, they couldn't even enter hell. It was the highest punishment of the Temple of Light. At the same time, at the trial site, a big shot of the Temple of Light apologized to the believers in tears and promised to thoroughly investigate the ugly problems that had been exposed. This matter had a lot to do with Tang En, but when it reached his ears, he had already returned to Han Sui City with his people. To be honest, Tang En didn't care about Vitker's life at first. He just thought of it as revenge for Raymond. The real purpose of this trip was to bring such a huge blow to the Temple of Light. As soon as he returned to Han Sui City, Tang En once again confirmed his saying that he was born to be busy. David sent a message that the old man in brown finally couldn't bear the pressure and was returning to the Bounty Hunter Guild. Chapter 756. In the evening, on the outskirts of a remote mountain range, Tang En, who had rushed over from Han Sui City without stopping, finally met up with David and the others. "Haha, boss, long time no see." "Long my ass, it's only been a week." That's true. But boss, we've all heard about what you did in Emoma City. Creating a god, TSK, that's amazing." "Oh it's nothing. It's just SOSO, third in the world." Who's first and second?" "Has anyone told you, David, that you have no sense of humor?" After a few teasing words and greetings, Tang En's expression turned serious. He looked around at the surrounding wilderness and frowned slightly. "Where's that old guy? Is this the hiding place of the Bounty Hunter Guild's higher-ups?" David did not answer immediately. Instead, he laughed strangely. "Hee boss, take a guess." "Damn, I find that you're getting bolder and bolder." Tang En raised his hand and was about to slap him. David shrank his head and did not make any obvious dodging movements. Of course, it was useless to dodge. His body movement was not at the same level as Tang En's. However, Tang En was just pretending. After raising his hand, he withdrew it and touched his chin. He looked around and muttered in a low voice for a moment. No wonder the secret organization couldn't dig them out. It turns out that they were hiding in the deep mountains and forests. Well, if it's here, it's a bandit stronghold. F***ck? Hearing this, David opened his mouth and was shocked. "Boss, you guessed it?" "David, you idiot." Harry, who was dressed in black armor, walked over from not far away with a look of disdain. Boss was just talking to himself. "You F***king admitted it so quickly. Who can't guess it?" David was stunned and then slapped his forehead. He realized that he was stupid. Tang En smiled and patted him on the shoulder. He said earnestly, "It's good that you continue to be simple-minded. Because as long as I see you, my sense of superiority in intelligence spontaneously arises." Jokes aside, Tang En immediately learned the details from Harry. About 2 days ago, when Tang En and the others started to attack in Ma City, the brown-clothed old man finally couldn't bear the pressure and quietly left the previous hiding place with his people. After that, although he cautiously took a few detours, it was undoubtedly impossible to shake off David and the others. In the end, he arrived here and quietly disappeared into the mountain range. David and the others did not alert the enemy after tracking them down. After all, although their concealment and tracking skills were top-notch, if they really fought, the two Earth Stage warriors beside the brown-clothed old man would be enough to make them lose face. Therefore, to be on the safe side, they sent the news back to Hanshui City while cautiously probing their surroundings. Not long before Tang En arrived, David and the others finally determined the hiding place of the Bounty Hunter Guild's higher-ups. This was also unexpected because they did not choose to hide in the town. Instead, they quietly occupied a bandit stronghold. It had to be said that the upper echelons of the guild were truly ingenious. The north was vast and sparsely populated. Except for the densely populated towns, there were few people in the vast jungles and mountains, except for bandits, mercenaries and other special professions. Hiding here could indeed greatly reduce the possibility of being discovered. Moreover, after circling around the stronghold, Tang En could not help but frown. Lying in the pile of rocks, Harry introduced in a low voice, "Boss, there are almost no flaws in the terrain of this stronghold. It's surrounded by mountains on two sides. One side is a winding path leading to the periphery. It's easy to defend and hard to attack. The other side goes straight to the abyss. Ordinary people can't cross it. Only a drawbridge inside the stronghold connects the two sides. And it should be their escape route." Tang En heard this and nodded gently. It's not easy, with such tight security, Tang En could enter by himself. However, the stronghold was not like the manor. Not to mention that he was not sure if the other party's higher-ups were in disguise. Even if they were not, it would be a problem to guess where the other party was hiding. Therefore, there was not much point in sneaking in alone. And if he brought David and the others, the possibility of being exposed would be greatly increased. After all, not everyone in the gray space was good at sneaking in. The main attackers like David were not good at sneaking in. After thinking about it, Tang En asked in a low voice, "Have you checked the inside of the stronghold? What's the strength of the other party?" "I went in once in the afternoon. The defense near the stronghold gate is very strict, and there are many guards. Because there are two masters nearby, they should be Earth Stage warriors. I don't have the confidence to sneak in, so I can only choose to retreat." Well done. It's about time. Let's go back first." After avoiding the guards and approaching the stronghold to observe, Tang En pondered for a while and returned to the periphery of the stronghold with Harry. "Boss, what should we do?" Although the situation was a bit difficult, David's expression did not change. On the one hand, he was confident in his own strength. On the other hand, he believed that Tang En could come up with a solution. This was David's strength, but also his weakness. He was loyal enough, but at the same time, he lacked the ability to be a leader. To put it bluntly, he was a talented general, but he could not be a commander. Of course, people were different. David also admitted that he was not cut out to be a commander. His idea was very simple, that was to complete the task given by the boss. The rest was not a problem for him to consider. It's very simple. Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes and waved his arm. "Since it's not easy to go in, then force them out. Let's go and prepare some things first. We'll make plans later in the night." Harry raised his eyebrows and showed a dagger. "Then, boss, should I take people to pull out the nails around us first?" The so-called nails were hidden sentries. If they wanted to do something, naturally they had to clean up the surroundings first. However, Tang En waved his hand and turned to leave. "No, someone will clean up. You can go with me to prepare." David and Harry were startled when they heard this. Then, they thought of something and looked at each other. However, they did not say anything and silently followed Tang En's footsteps. Needless to say, It was naturally Michaud and the others who were going to clean up the hidden sentries. Tang En said that Michaud could not meet David, but it was inevitable that they knew each other's existence. For example, in the previous battle in Han Hui City, it was Michaud who saved David. It was impossible to completely cover up. After all, the two sides were too familiar with each other, and a mask alone could not cover up anything. Of course, what should be covered up should be covered up. At least, he could not let Josiah know that Michaud was still alive. Moreover, it would be much better to have David and the others cover up for him. In addition to these reasons, the most important thing was that Tang En needed Michaud as an assistant. As he thought just now, David was not suitable to be an independent leader, and Tang En was only one person. With Michaud's help, it would undoubtedly be much easier. The terrain of the stronghold could be said to be dangerous, but it was impossible to say that there were no flaws. In addition, this was not a confrontation between two armies, and the stronghold was not a strategic place that had to be taken. Naturally, Tang En did not need to think too much about it. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and the twilight was boundless. Not long after midnight, the wind blew thick smoke from the front of the stronghold, which was the narrow and winding path, silently rolled in. At first, the guards of the stronghold did not care. It was normal for fog to rise at night, but after smelling the obvious fire in the smoke, they naturally changed their minds. Suddenly, a shrill whistle instantly broke the silence of the night sky. In just a few breaths, there were people everywhere in the stronghold, and bonfires were everywhere. Accompanied by a few angry roars, several small crossbows near the stronghold gate were pushed out. After a slightly chaotic movement, the people in the stronghold looked around, but they did not find any trace of the enemy. Before they could open their mouths to curse, suddenly, there was a sharp whistling sound, and the air was pierced. Suddenly, dozens of flames fell from the towering peaks on both sides of the stronghold like stars falling to the ground. They did not hurt anyone, but directly nailed the buildings in the stronghold, and the fire suddenly lit up. "Damn it! Damn it! You are so despicable! Put out the fire, quickly put out the fire!" Bran was not as cold as the northern wilderness, so most of the buildings here were made of wood, unlike the northern wilderness, which was basically piled up with stones. It was precisely because of this that under the continuous attack of the fire arrows, several buildings were quickly set on fire. At this time, the people in the stronghold suddenly understood the intention of the enemy, which was to directly use fire to destroy their tight defense line. It was a very simple strategy, but it was undoubtedly very effective. Not only did it make the crossbows completely useless, but it was also unrealistic to put out the fire. The stronghold was located in the mountains, and the water source was already a problem. Even if there was a mountain spring nearby, distant water could not put out a nearby fire. Of course, it was possible to separate the fire source, but would the people in the stronghold do this? On the left peak, Tang En casually answered David's question about whether the enemy would obediently withdraw from the stronghold while looking around with binoculars. The enemy's strength is not low, and there are a lot of guards following them. Logically speaking, it is absolutely no problem to defend the stronghold, but, they are in the light and we are in the dark. They don't know that we only have a few dozen people, so they can't judge whether or not we can defend this stronghold. There is also the old guy who came here before. Although he did not participate in the battle by the cold river, he must know the details. TSK, a void-level warrior, 3 earth-level warriors. With such strength, they died in our hands. Do you think the enemy is afraid? Come on, of course they are afraid. It is unknown, and there is a little fear in their hearts. What choice do you think they will make? After a pause, Tang En handed the binoculars to David, and the corner of his mouth rose. Look, they made a very wise decision. Well, I like it. David was stunned and quickly raised the binoculars. He saw that in the stronghold below, where flames were everywhere, there were clusters of figures retreating to the drawbridge behind in a panic. At the same time, there were a lot of guards near the stronghold gate, holding crossbows and aiming at the narrow path covered by thick fog as if they were facing a great enemy. In fact, there were only a few members of the gray space who finished setting the fire and then made a fuss. David blinked and turned his head, a little stunned. It's that simple? What else? Tang En shrugged, then reached out to take the binoculars, squinted at the drawbridge behind the stronghold, and muttered to himself, "Well, let me see which one is more like the hidden big boss. Come out, come out. Hey, there are not many masters." Chapter 757. Under the dim light of the fire, Tang En could not recognize who was the great philanthropist of Mountain Stream City, Zachary, the leader of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild. It was not that his eyesight was bad. Tang En had already locked onto a few important people who were being protected in the middle. However, in order to disguise themselves as qualified bandits, they were all dressed almost the same. There was no difference at all, so it was naturally difficult to identify them. However, this fire was not useless at all. Not only did it force the other party out of the turtle shell, but it also forced them out. Tang En also found a strange situation, that was, there were not many warriors who could be called masters in this group. Although it was a rough look, from what Tang En observed, there were only about 15 or 16 Earth-level warriors here. Other than that, he did not find any powerhouse who had touched the threshold of void level. This was undoubtedly a bit abnormal. In any case, they were also the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Previously, in order to kill Tang En, they sent out a void-level warrior. There was no reason for them not to leave a few for self-protection. After thinking about it, Tang En still did not dare to be careless. He did not take advantage of the night to rush to assassinate. Instead, he followed behind from a distance and observed the situation first. In fact, this time Tang En guessed wrong. Zachary and other higher-ups did not have any void-level warriors to protect them. It was not that they could not gather enough. Although void-level warriors were rare, they could still find a few with the large scale of the Bounty Hunter Guild. But now the timing was a bit special. The voices of protests against the Temple of Light were getting louder and louder. Some people who were not on good terms with the temple also took advantage of the situation. In this case, the Temple of Light naturally prioritized itself, gathering forces to secretly attack everywhere to calm the chaos. In this way, of course, they had no time to think about these higher-ups of the guild. The middle of the night was calm. Zachary and the others retreated in the direction of the south. Judging from the route, they would not pass through any towns in the next few days. For the time being, they could not see any specific target. The next morning, Tang En, who could not see anything after repeated observations, finally could not help but test the waters. Just as Zachary and the other 200 people majestically passed through a small canyon, a few Earth stage martial artists suddenly turned their heads and shouted, "Who? F***CKU. Someone answered straightforwardly. A figure appeared out of nowhere and rushed to the back of the group. After successfully cutting in, the figure was not in a hurry to charge. He simply stepped and spun, casually sprinkling out a few imperceptible blade lights. The surrounding guards who were caught off guard immediately covered their necks and fell to the ground. With the nature of the Bounty Hunter Guild, these guards were naturally not ordinary guards around nobles and wealthy merchants. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were more than qualified to be bounty hunters. But now, several of them had fallen in a single exchange. This undoubtedly showed that the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. They were not on the same level at all. The surrounding guards couldn't help but slow down when they saw this. They looked at each other with hesitation. The black shadow that jumped in was a middle-aged man with a sallow face. He was Tang En. He did not rush to attack. Instead, he stood in place and looked at the center of the crowd with a smile, as if he was trying to identify something. He looked completely arrogant. You're courting death. The 3 Earth-level warriors who were closest to him couldn't help but be furious when they saw this. They burst out their do-chi, knocked away the guards beside them, and instantly attacked. Ha! With a long laugh, Tang Yin's figure flashed like a ghost. He dodged the attack and flashed into the crowd. He grabbed and threw. The surrounding guards had no room to resist. They only felt a blur in front of their eyes. They flew straight into the 3 Earth-level warriors like a cloud. This move was undoubtedly very annoying. The 3 Earth-level warriors couldn't take it. If they didn't take it, they would have to waste time dodging. They were so depressed that they roared again and again. At this moment, "Spread out!" Thunder roared. The 6 Earth-level warriors stepped forward together. Their attacks were hidden but not released. They surrounded him from all angles like a fishing net. They obviously wanted to kill him in one fell swoop. There was a tiger in front and a hungry wolf behind. But Tang Yin's expression didn't change. He just grabbed another guard who couldn't disperse in time and threw him to the Earth-level warriors chasing behind him. Then, he jumped over himself. Haha, good timing. Pushing the guard away, the Earth-level warrior was not afraid. Instead, he was happy. His do-chi surged out violently and covered the big sword in his hand. He stepped forward and slashed down. His idea was simple. No matter how strong the opponent was, as long as he could delay for a few seconds, his companions could form an encirclement. At that time, the attacker would die without a doubt. But, could he really delay for a few seconds? Whoosh! The big sword whistled down, but there was no feeling of force. The Earth-level warrior's heart trembled. He knew that he had missed. Before he could pull back the big sword, his eyes suddenly blurred. A sallow face appeared in front of him. The corners of his mouth were slightly curled, and his eyes were mocking. It gave people an indescribably strange feeling. Roar! The Earth-level warrior had rich combat experience. He knew that he had met an opponent with outstanding speed. With a roar, he simply threw away the big sword and directly punched with a violent do-chi. But this time, the attack was not so easy to land, because a rotating dagger had already appeared in front of him. Blocking with a horizontal fist, being broken, attacking, retreating, attacking. Just by making a move, the Earth-grade martial artist was completely suppressed by the rainstorm-like blade light. Shocked, he hurriedly retreated, but the blade light followed like a shadow, lower abdomen, chest, arms, thighs. In just a few breaths of time, dozens of blade lights easily broke through his defense and hit him squarely. Streams of blood spurted out from the Earth-grade martial artist's body. Finally, before his companions arrived, the Earth-grade martial artist fell backward like a broken sack. Ha! After successfully breaking through the defense, Tang Yin laughed wildly and swaggered away. His speed was extremely fast. The few Earth-level warriors who came late saw this and chased after him. But at this time, "Come back, don't chase." Zachary, who was in the crowd, had an extremely ugly expression. The corner of his eyes twitched as he watched the sneaky attacker leave arrogantly. In the end, he called out to the Earth-level warrior who was chasing him. Then he looked at the scattered formation around him. There were a few silent guards on the ground, and an Earth-level warrior whose chest was badly mutilated and twitching from time to time. He let out a long breath and turned to look at the old man in brown who had just arrived 2 days ago. "Who is he?" I don't know." The old man in brown came back to his senses and shook his head with difficulty with an ashen face. At this time, of course he knew that he was the one who attracted these evil stars. "Humph!" Zachary snorted coldly. If it weren't for the special situation now, he definitely wouldn't mind letting the old man in brown, who caused them to fall into this situation, go directly to see the light god. This person isn't a void-level cultivator, right? What should we do next? A senior member of the guild asked in a panic with lingering fear. Squinting at the figure disappearing behind the hill, Zachary shouted in a deep voice, What are you panicking for? If the other party is really a void-level warrior, can we still live now? This was the truth. If the middle-aged man just now was really a void-level warrior, he only needed to fly in the sky and attack randomly. He didn't dare to say that he could kill everyone here, but these senior members who were not low in status and strength would undoubtedly be dead. Of course, Zachary didn't know that Tang En's situation was a bit special. Although his strength was comparable to a void-level warrior, because he didn't cultivate the power system of another world, he really couldn't fly. After pondering for a moment, Zachary waved his hand with a gloomy face. Everyone on guard, continue to move forward. Then he looked back again, his eyes were gloomy, and he secretly said in his heart, if you have the guts, continue to follow and see who dies first in the end. Zachary didn't know what to do and was secretly furious. After Tang En disappeared into the hill, he met with David and others who were waiting here. Boss, how was it? Because they were afraid that the other party might have a backup plan, David and the others didn't participate in this raid. Shaking his head, Tang En touched his chin. It's a bit strange, the other party doesn't seem to have a void-level powerhouse to help this time. Haha, that's good. David didn't think much when he heard this and laughed. As long as we plan well, then this chase is in the bag. I hope so. He didn't want to think about things that he couldn't figure out. Anyway, now that he had a rare advantage, Tang En nodded and smiled with emotion. Haha, it's not easy. Being chased until now, I didn't expect that there would be a time when I was chasing others. Thinking about it, I'm a little excited. Chapter 758. If one were to look at Tang En's experiences in the past few years in the other world, then the glorious title of the most unlucky transmigrator in history would definitely belong to him. First, he was in danger of being erased by the system, then he was hunted down by Boza's police station, then by Blank's army, then by the Dusk Hunter group, then by Sylvia, then by Lon Shah and his men. Until the end, he simply became a wanted criminal in the whole continent. The tragic experience along the way was simply enough to make those who heard it cry and those who saw it grieve. It could be said to be a real transmigration tragedy. But now, Tang En finally tasted something different. One day, he could actually turn around and hunt down others? Really, really delightful to hear and see. In the afternoon, after the previous short surprise attack, half a day of peace and tranquility, which also made the tensed Zachary and the others finally breathe a sigh of relief. But it was also at this moment that suddenly, whoosh, 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 with a piercing whistle, 3 pitch-black arrows shot rapidly from the left side of the team in a triangular formation. Sir, be careful. The Earth Stage martial artist's reaction was extremely fast, and he quickly determined that these arrows were coming for Zachary and the other higher-up. With a roar, he moved sideways to block them, and a domineering sword light instantly swung out to intercept them. Bang, bang, bang. As expected, although the 3 arrows were extremely accurate, because the distance was too far, before they could get close, they were hit and exploded by the sword light in the air. At the same time, 5 or 6 Earth Stage martial artists rushed out of the team, carrying a murderous aura as they ran in the direction of the arrows. This series of responses was quick and swift, and the division of labor was orderly, obviously prearranged. But it was also at this moment that a flustered and exasperated roar suddenly came from the team. Who, it's you again. It turned out that when everyone's attention was attracted to the left side of the team, the sallow-faced middle-aged man from before once again charged in from the end of the team. This time, his target was extremely clear. He did not bother with the guards at all, and directly charged towards Zachary and the others in the middle of the team. Stop him. More than 10 Earth Stage martial artists were originally inseparable from the higher-ups of the guild. Seeing this, they hurriedly stepped forward and attacked together. Ha ha! With a long laugh, Twain advanced instead of retreating. His figure flickered, turned and dodged, and he became even more ghostly and nimble. The surrounding guards often only felt that a saber strike that they were confident in was already empty by the time it struck down. Here, over here. Block him. F***CK. Who the F***CK are you chopping? It was chaos, mixed with the angry screams of those who were accidentally injured by their own people. The previously neat defensive formation became a mess after a short moment, and they were battered and exhausted. Not only did they not Earth Stage martial artists, but they also to the Earth Stage martial artists. The Earth Stage martial artists' Earth Stage of the World Stage were of the Earth Stage of Time's world. Of them could not help but roared. Of course, this was said to the Earth Stage martial artist. But as soon as the voice fell, the ghostly Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes and glanced at the Earth Stage martial artist. With a whoosh, he broke out of the encirclement in an instant and quickly brandished his dagger to kill. The reason was very simple. Those who could command the Earth Stage martial artists were naturally the higher-ups of the guild. Tang En did not know who among them was the disguised Zachary. He could only use this simple method to determine. The so-called shot hits the bird that sticks out was also the reason. The Earth Stage martial artist was not Zachary. But seeing Tang En, who was obviously coming towards him, his face turned pale. He knew that he had made a low-level mistake. He hurriedly retreated. Kill him, kill him! After the surrounding Earth Stage martial artists heard the order, they no longer hesitated. Their footsteps paused, and their hands shot out colorful and violent fighting lights, crazily pressing down. Tang En was still some distance away from the Earth Stage martial artists, and this distance was the opportunity for the Earth Stage martial artists. They would rather kill each other now than kill this threatening guy on the spot. Tang En did not look back. He just grabbed casually while sprinting, and a guard involuntarily rose into the air, dancing and flying towards the violent fighting lights behind him. The colorful fighting lights were the combined attacks of 10 Earth Stage martial artists. Not to mention a small guard, even if a Void Stage martial artist came over, he would have to temporarily avoid the attack. So, the end of this guard could naturally be imagined. Bang! There was no scream. Just a touch, and the guard's body directly exploded in the air. Nothing else could be seen, only a large amount of blood mist instantly diffused and shrouded the scene. The violent fighting lights were not hindered by the slightest pause, and still pressed down rapidly. Looking at the blood mist shrouding over, the constantly retreating Earth Stage martial artists could no longer see Tang En's figure in their line of sight. They subconsciously narrowed their eyes, and their pupils suddenly shrank sharply. An inconspicuous blood-colored blade light was sandwiched in the blood mist, quietly flying in front of their eyes. At this moment the Earth Stage martial artist only felt that time seemed to slow down. He watched helplessly as the blood-colored dagger pierced between his eyes inch by inch, right in the middle of his eyebrows. Boom! The colorful fighting lights finally exploded. The air waves rolled, and the previous blood mist was instantly swept away. At the same time, dozens of guards who could not dodge in time were swept away. In an instant, their limbs were broken and scattered in the air. In fact, the 10 Earth Stage martial artists had tried to suppress their attack range as much as possible. Otherwise, everyone present was afraid that no one would have a good time. But Do Chi was originally overbearing, and their control ability was also limited. As a result, the surrounding guards naturally became sacrificial lambs. No one noticed that the Earth Stage martial artist had died. Everyone's eyes were focused on the explosion of the fighting lights, as if they were facing a great enemy. Was he dead? Just as doubts arose, there was a sudden scream of horror. Here! Everyone suddenly turned their heads and saw that the sallow-faced middle-aged man had actually come to the periphery of the crowd. Blood was faintly seeping out of the corner of his mouth. It seemed that he had also suffered a little. But it was clear that compared to the large-scale internecine effect caused by the fighting lights, this loss was really too small. Hee hee. Chuckling a few times, Tang En calmly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He stretched out his thumb and slowly drew across his throat. Facing the 10 Earth Stage martial artists, Zachary, and other Earth Stage martial artists, he made a throat-cutting gesture. Then, leaving the mess behind, he swaggered off. The meaning of this action was obvious. Even if there were many guards, so what? If I want to kill you, who can stop me? A moment later, the few Earth Stage martial artists who had previously chased in the direction of the arrow turned back. They saw that the atmosphere of the team was stiff and cold. Most of the guards were injured, and they were throwing dozens of their companions' bodies into the ditch by the road. Among them was a Earth Stage martial artist with a hole in his forehead. Startled, looking at Zachary's gaze, an Earth Stage martial artist shook his head and sighed. We didn't catch up. The other party retreated too quickly. Hearing this, Zachary's livid face became even more unsightly. He then took a breath and waved his hand. Continue forward. After that, the day and night passed in the midst of continuous assassination and assassination. In fact, the overall strength of Tang En's side was slightly inferior. That's right, Tang En's personal strength was very high. If it was a one-on-one fight, including those Earth Stage martial artists, no one was his opponent. But when 15 or 16 Earth Stage martial artists gathered together, the situation was different. Just like the scene when Tang En escaped from the Imperial City in the northern wilderness, more than a dozen experts of the fierce Eagle tribe attacked the mountain together. He could only desperately dodge. And because the other party came from the Bounty Hunter Guild, they were familiar with all kinds of assassination method. David and the others could only do most of the things from the side, otherwise there would be casualties. Of course, Tang En naturally wouldn't use his shortcomings to clash head-on with the other party's strengths. After a day and a night of pursuit, constantly looking for and creating opportunities to put pressure on the other party and attack their morale. Given Tang En's strength, as long as he launched a surprise attack, the other party would definitely suffer more or less casualties. After losing a few of their companions, those Earth-grade fighters also recognized the difference in strength between the two sides. They no longer dared to hope that they could surround Twain, and only stubbornly protected the upper echelons of the guild, allowing those guards to continuously die in the successive clashes. Although Zachary and the others were repeatedly assassinated and had to flee in a sorry state, Xiang Nan's determination never changed. Finally, the stalemate was broken in a steep canyon. Luke fired 5 explosive arrows in a row, shattering the rocks above the canyon and crushing the fleeing team below. Tang En took advantage of the chaos to kill 3 upper echelons of the guild and 5 Earth Stage martial artists, securing victory in one fell swoop. In this situation, Zachary finally stopped being on the run, and had every upper echelon take some guards and flee separately. It had to be said that there was nothing Tang En could do about it. At this point, there were only 5 upper echelons of the Bounty Hunter Guild left, but because everyone was in disguise, Tang En couldn't be sure who was Zachary. Of course, it was just a little helplessness. While they could rely on luck to temporarily avoid being hunted down if they split up, once the guards were scattered, Tang En would only need to spend a little more time to wipe out the other party. With victory right in front of him, Tang En decisively led a few members of the Gray Space in pursuit, while David, Harry, and the others split up to chase after them. Now that the difference in strength between the two sides was obvious, Tang En couldn't be bothered to hide anymore. He sped up with a few people, and after about 15 minutes, he stopped a dozen people who were fleeing. 2 injured Earth Stage martial artists, 7 or 8 guards, and a curly-haired old man in a black robe, who was also an upper echelon of the guild. When the curly-haired old man saw that it was Tang En, his face turned ashen and his body trembled. Tang En sized him up and smacked his lips. Tisk tsk, Zachary? No. The curly-haired old man shook his head in panic. Twain nodded his head noncommittally and waved his hand, taking the lead to charge towards the two Earth Stage warriors with ugly expressions. The two Earth Stage martial artists certainly knew of Tang En's strength. Their injuries were also caused by Tang En. After looking at each other, they simply abandoned the curly-haired old man and ran away at the same time. Damn it! Don't go, come back, all of you come back. Reaching out his arms in vain, the curly-haired old man's expression was first shocked and angry, but then it turned into a desperate plea. Seeing this, Tang En's footsteps also paused. Looking at the two fleeing Earth Stage martial artists, he thought for a moment and decided not to chase after them and kill them all. Of course, this was not kindness, but it was unnecessary. What's more, after killing the Earth Stage martial artists, Tang En would definitely get a lot of blood and chi, and the old butler reminded him to control his blood and chi level. Since the Earth Stage martial artists had fled, the 7 or 8 guards naturally would not stay and wait for death. Avoiding the curly-haired old man's desperate gaze, they also chose to scatter and flee. In less than a minute, only the curly-haired old man with trembling legs was left in the field. It was not that he did not want to escape, but he knew that with his identity, the other party would definitely not let him go. Trembling, he took out a short sword from his arms and shouted in a threatening manner, "Don't come over! I'm warning you, don't come over, you don't dare to kill me!" Shaking his head, Tang En stepped in front of the curly-haired old man and calmly reached out to grab the short sword. "It's useless, the Temple of Light can't protect you." "Oh, the short sword is not bad, thanks." He took the short sword and looked it over in his palm, praised it, and casually threw it back. A member of the gray space behind him happily caught it and put it away. The curly-haired old man opened his mouth, but he was unable to say anything when his greatest reliance was revealed so easily. With a flip of his hands, more than 10 shiny silver needles appeared between Tang En's fingers. "Okay, let's do a simple one. And relax, the pain is only a little." Although time was not tight, Tang En naturally did not want to waste time on the curly-haired old man. He directly used the silver needles to force a confession and asked what he wanted to know. "Rodney? Damn, why didn't you say it was not Zachary?" Boss, he seemed to have said it wasn't him just now, so it's like this." "Then you can't blame me, right?" "Why are you blindly telling the truth?" "I don't know which direction Zachary escaped in. F***ck, I've worked for nothing." Scratching his head, Tang En casually pushed away the curly-haired old man who had several silver needles in his head and whose facial features were bleeding. He got up and shook his head. King knew my luck wouldn't be good. Just as Tang En was complaining, he looked up and saw a figure in the distance running towards them. "This is Lei Ji, right?" The young man who had just obtained a good short sword narrowed his eyes and said softly. Lei Ji, a member of the second stage gray space under David. After rushing over, he panted and said, "Boss, the captain has found Zachary's whereabouts." "Haha." Tang En was overjoyed when he heard this. "Then what are you waiting for? Take me there quickly." Every upper echelon had more or less a few surviving Earth Stage warriors. Zachary's position was high, so naturally there were more. As the saying goes, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Although those Earth Stage warriors were basically injured, David, Harry, and the others naturally could not beat them. So they were only responsible for tracking and ensuring that they did not lose face. The matter of fighting had to be handed over to Tang En. Panting, Lei Ji spread his hands. "However, there was an accident. The captain wants you to hurry over and take a look. And between the mountains and steep ridges. Thank you for coming in time, otherwise I'm afraid I would have been killed." "Thank you. Thank you very much." Zachary, who had been fleeing in panic until now, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He showed a look of great relief and kept bowing to express his gratitude. "Sir Zachary, you're too polite, this is what we should do." The handsome young man in holy armor stepped forward and reached out to support him. "On the contrary, we should thank you, Thank you for your generosity all these years. Oh, it's nothing. After exchanging pleasantries, Zachary took the remaining men and merged into the large group of knights that had just arrived. The team set off again, still heading south. It was at this time that the valiant woman standing beside the handsome young man, who had been silent all this time, frowned slightly. Her gaze swept over the wounded Earth Stage warriors. These people, their strength is not bad, and their murderous aura is very strong. And do you know Zachary? I've just heard of him. The handsome young man shrugged. He seems to be a well-known philanthropist. Every year, he donates millions of donations to the temple. The valiant woman's expression eased slightly when she heard this, and she nodded in realization. I see. No wonder the temple still ordered us to protect his safety at this time. Yes, this can be a big client. After a few chuckles, the handsome young man's expression turned serious. He looked at Zachary's guards and touched his chin. But he seems to have offended some great people this time. 4 Earth Stage warriors and dozens of guards with strong strength. TSK, he can still be beaten so miserably. It seems that the pressure on our mission this time is not small. The valiant woman shook her head indifferently. It's our duty to protect the safety of believers. That's right. After echoing, the handsome young man looked at the woman beside him and said hesitantly, after this mission is completed, you should go back to the south with me. Hey, you know, I'm very observant. I held back for a long time and didn't say anything. Your condition is obviously not right, you'd better go back and adjust. The valiant woman pursed her lips and shook her head to refuse. No, I can't leave the north, at least not in a short time. Just because of that heretic called Tang-en? As if something was said, the valiant woman suddenly turned her head, her eyes as sharp as a knife. The handsome young man spread out his palms innocently. I didn't mean to investigate this. You've been in a strange state since you came back from the northern wilderness, plus you were on that ship before. It's easy to guess. After looking at each other for a moment, the valiant woman took the lead to look away, leaving a cold sentence, and continued to ride the horse forward. I will never leave the north until I kill him with my own hands. The handsome young man couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. But you don't know where he is now. I can wait until he appears. And pause for a while, the valiant woman said expressionlessly, I should have seen him in Emoma City a few days ago. Emoma City? The handsome young man was stunned and then raised his hand to support his forehead. Oh, that's not a good memory. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. Behind the low hill about a few hundred meters away from the cavalry team, Tang-en maintained his posture of looking forward. His face was blank and his eyes were blank. He didn't move for a long time. After a while, the cavalry team went farther and farther away. Tang-en still seemed to be unable to believe his eyes. He raised the binoculars and looked again for a while, falling into a long silence again. Until the cavalry team completely disappeared behind the mountains, Tang-en took a deep breath, turned over, and rubbed his forehead with a tangled expression. Sylvia, Owens. I'm confused, why do I see you two everywhere? Chapter 759. The sudden appearance of Sylvia and Owens had undoubtedly disrupted Tang-en's plan. Although both of them were Earth-rank experts, each person was different. The threat they posed to Tang-en was naturally much greater than the Earth-rank warriors of the Bounty Hunter Guild. The reason was very simple. If Sylvia had a conflict with the Earth-rank warriors of the guild, the one who would lose in the end would definitely be the Earth-rank warriors of the guild. This was the so-called martial arts genius who could challenge those of a higher rank. David scratched his head as he watched the large cavalry troop disappear from sight. He knew how powerful Sylvia was, so his expression was also conflicted. Boss, what should we do next? Continue the assassination? Wait, my mind is a little messy. Let me sort it out first. Tang-en supported his forehead with one hand, speechless. After a moment, he seemed to have thought of something. He looked up in the direction where the troop had disappeared and muttered to himself, "It's a little strange. Since Sylvia and the others have already rushed over to help, why does Zachary still insist on retreating to the south?" David was stunned. Maybe he feels that it's not safe enough. It was a logical conjecture, but Twain nodded thoughtfully when he heard it. It makes sense. I killed a lot of Earth-rank warriors earlier. Zachary is naturally worried, so he's still retreating to the south. His eyebrows suddenly raised, and he turned to ask an irrelevant question. Where's the nearest city from here? I remember there's a small town a few dozen miles to the west. Harry's brain was the most agile. He only rolled his eyes and quickly gave the answer. Tang En decisively ordered, "Okay, Harry, you take people to that small town now. Contact the secret organization and check on the recent movements of the Temple of Light, and especially in the south." No problem. Harry simply turned around and pointed at a few members of the gray space. They ran to the west together. David frowned. "Boss, are you suspecting that the Temple of Light still has reinforcements coming?" Tang En nodded and then sighed. "It's better to be safe than sorry. The Temple of Light is still too powerful. Even if we make the slightest mistake, it is very likely that we will be consigned to eternal damnation. Let's go, let's follow them." The next half a day passed peacefully, but Sylvia and the others seemed to know that the danger was not over yet. Whether it was moving forward, resting, or setting up camp to eat, they would rather slow down to ensure that there was no danger ahead. They were very cautious. Of course, with Tang En's strength, if he wanted to launch a surprise attack, he would still have a chance. However, he did not do so and just stayed far behind. To be honest, Tang En had mixed feelings about Sylvia. How should he put it? He couldn't be said to have tender feelings for the fairer sex, but he couldn't be as calm as still water either. Perhaps this could only be blamed on himself under the evil body for acting on his own initiative and insisting on playing some dark game. Wouldn't it have been better to just kill him? Still F***king force her. Since you F***king force her, why don't you force her to the end? Cough, cough, thinking too much out of habit, his thoughts were in a mess. In the end, the twilight gradually darkened, and Tang En's gloomy and unclear expression gradually became indifferent. He exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Phew! The current Tang En was after all not the third-rate student he used to be. After settling down for a long time, he threw away the distracting thoughts in his heart and began to silently think about how to capture Zachary alive, or how to kill Sylvia, and at this moment, Harry, who looked hurried, caught up in the dark with some information. Because of Tang En, the current secret agency attached great importance to the intelligence of the Temple of Light. This was also the reason why Harry could rush back so quickly. And it turned out that Tang En's previous guess was not groundless fears. About 5 days ago, which is when we started the hunt, the Temple of Light in the south sent a team to the north. Their strength is unknown. They said they were here to help purge the fallen clergymen here, but after they arrived, they did not go to the various cities and towns. Instead, they disappeared from everyone's sight. Then, 3 days ago, someone saw traces of them in Hookah City. There were cavalrymen and mages in white robes. After that, they left the city and disappeared, and there was no more news. Boss, I've checked, if we go in a straight line, we'll bump into the people from Hookah City head-on in 2 days at most. Damn. Sure enough. Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes, and his expression was a little unsightly. Xia Weian and the others were enough of a headache. If they were to meet up with this team that was obviously not weak, they would undoubtedly have no chance at all. But this is a little wrong. David scratched his head. Isn't Zachary just a lackey? Where did he get the ability to mobilize the people of the Temple of Light? And just to deal with us, isn't this a little too much? This is not strange, David. A lackey is still a dog, and you still have to look at the master before you beat the dog. Tang En shook his head, and his expression was gloomy. And if I'm not wrong, this team is not just here to deal with us, but to completely uproot our forces. What a big appetite! Humph! David curled his lips in disdain, but after a light snort, he did not say anything in the end. Because that was the truth. Judging from the power of the Temple of Light, they really had such an appetite. At this time, Harry dug out a letter from the intelligence paper and handed it over. "Boss, this is the letter that Miss Lena sent to all the cities a few days ago. It's for you." Tang En took it in surprise, opened it, and scanned it up and down. His expression froze for a moment, and then his eyes gradually lit up, and the corners of his mouth unconsciously rose. "Ha! It's really better to be early than to be here at the right time." David and Harry were stunned when they heard this. "What's wrong, boss?" "Haha, it's nothing. I just received a big gift." Tang En's mood was obviously better, and the gloomy expression from before was instantly swept away. "David, except for Harry and Luke, take everyone back to Cold Water City and move some things from Lena's laboratory. Remember, be quick." Yes." Despite his doubts, David turned around and left without hesitation after receiving the order. Hearing this, Luke walked over and spread his hand. "Boss, what should we do?" "It's very simple. Find the location of the temple team." Slightly stunned, Luke looked at the cavalry in the distance. What about these people? Are we just going to ignore them?" Tang En's expression was relaxed, and he waved his hand confidently. "Just go around them. As long as we find the temple team, we don't have to worry about them not coming over." This was the truth. As long as Zachary wanted to keep his life, he would definitely meet up with the temple team. In a short while, the gray space was divided into two groups. One group was led by David, and most of the members were heading back. The other group was led by Tang En and the other two. They went around the team that had already set up camp and were resting, and rushed straight ahead. But after only a few minutes, Harry suddenly slapped his forehead, as if he had thought of something. He said with a strange expression, "Boss, I have another piece of news." "Huh!" "Little Carol said that you didn't keep your word. You clearly said that you would bring her along this time, but in the end, you ran off alone. She said that she despises you." Tang En couldn't help but rub his nose awkwardly. Because the battle in Cold Water City involved a Void Realm martial artist, Tang En had indeed promised to bring little Carol along when he comforted her. But a few days ago, he and Raymond had just returned to Cold Water City when they received news from David. At that time, he didn't think too much about it and directly rushed over alone. He had completely forgotten about little Carol. Rubbing his forehead in frustration, Tang En changed the topic and complained, "What's wrong with kids nowadays? They're all so violent. They're not innocent at all." Harry and Luke looked at each other, their lips twitching in disbelief. Then Luke curled his lip and said the truth. "It's all because of you, boss." Hee. Harry chuckled but didn't say anything. Clearly, he agreed. That was the truth. For little Carol to have her current temperament and skills, it was definitely the result of Twain's teachings. Tang En glanced at Luke and smacked his lips. "Tisk tsk. I don't talk to people who have been completely defeated by kid." Luke was stumped for a moment, and his calm expression instantly collapsed. "Boss, you don't hit people in the face when you hit them, and you don't expose them when you're scolding them. You can't be like this." Chapter 760. 2 days later, in the morning, the rosy rising sun was trying its best to peek out from the east, full of vitality. The thin morning mist was also slowly flowing in the air, stubbornly refusing to disperse. On the other hand, the last wisp of night wind silently swept past the continuous mountain ranges, the winding mountain paths, and a quiet farm before finally disappearing without a trace. The strange thing was that the farmers, who usually got up early, seemed to have collectively slacked off today. They could hear the roosters crowing, but there was no smoke. Just as the atmosphere became more and more strange, more than 10 figures suddenly turned out from behind a low hill and appeared on the north side of the farm. Then, they ran over at a speed that ordinary people could not match. And just as these people appeared, in the fields more than 100 meters to the west of the farm, several figures flashed through the tall crops. "Boss, it's Zachary's guards. They're here," David said softly as he carefully closed the gap between the crops. Tang En, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like a bottomless well, distant and cold, but it instantly turned indifferent. He waved his hand and said, "Okay, everything will go according to the plan. And be careful. Don't worry, boss. There won't be any problems." Nodding gently, Tang En turned his head and rubbed the soft hair of the short figure beside him. The corner of his mouth rose. Then you should go and prepare to." "Okay." Little Carol pursed her lips and nodded. Her little face was serious. "But, brother, are you sure someone will come over if we wait there? If no one comes, I'll be angry this time." Tang En grinned as if he had a toothache and said innocently, "Please, I'm your brother. When have I lied to you?" "Not long ago. Don't pay attention to these details. Go, you won't be disappointed this time." Little Carol raised her head suspiciously and looked at the solemn Tang En. She hesitated for a moment, then finally dragged her sickle and disappeared into the crop. "Phew. Kids nowadays are getting harder and harder to fool." Tang En let out a long sigh and shook his head with a bitter smile, as if relieved of a burden. Seeing this, David came over and asked, "Boss, you're so assured to let little Carol go alone?" Tang En glared back at him. "Damn it. You knew that I was worried, yet you still brought her here? It was fine this time. She could handle it. Yes, there will be people there to protect her. I had no choice but to follow her. Boss, you know how good I am at hiding. If little Carol wanted to follow me, I wouldn't have been able to shake her off." David scratched his head awkwardly, and then his eyes flashed. He directly ignored the question of who would protect little Kara. Of course, this didn't need to be said. Now that all the members of the gray space were here, only a certain dead person would have the time to look after little Kara. "All right, after you go back this time, give me extra training." The corner of Tang En's mouth twitched. Of course, he knew little Carol's tracking skills because he was the one who taught her. "Don't." David's face suddenly turned bitter. Then he saw Tang En wave his hand and was about to leave. He remembered something and quickly said, "By the way, boss. In fact, we can just wait here for Zachary, Sylvia, and the others to enter the farm and kill them together. Why do you have to take this risk?" He muttered to himself. "You think I want to? So much blood energy, what a waste." Tang En shook his head and rejected. "No, Zachary is the person in charge of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild. He knows a lot of things that are very useful to us, so if possible, it's best to capture him alive." And pause for a while. Tang En pointed at the dozen or so figures running wildly and narrowed his eyes. "Do you know why Sylvia didn't come to the farm with them?" Why?" "Because she's Sylvia. I've seen a lot of people from the Temple of Light. Most of them are disgusting villains. Of course, there are a few different ones. Sylvia is one of them. In a sense, she was a good and righteous person through and through. Well, she's just a little big-boobed but brainless. Let's not comment on that for now. What do you think, such a righteous person, if she knew that Zachary was a high-ranking member of the Dirty Bounty Hunter Guild and had a close relationship with the Temple of Light, what would she do?" David was stunned and said subconsciously, "I'm afraid she would explode." "That's why." Tang En spread his hands. "The Temple of Light is also afraid that she would expose this matter if she knew about it. So, the reinforcement team arrived long ago but only occupied the farm and waited for Zachary to send Sylvia and the others away before they could meet up." "If that's the case..." David scratched his head. "This Sylvia is really a good person?" "Ha, you can think of it that way. But..." Tang En's eyes were a little complicated. After a flash, he shook his head and said indifferently, "She's an enemy after all, and there's no difference between good and bad enemies." After saying that, he waved his hand and disappeared into the field. There's no difference between good and bad enemies. TSK, listen, as expected of the boss. These words are so domineering. David clenched his fists and looked a little excited. But, all right, the boss is gone. Why are you still flattering him? Harry bent over with a look of disdain. Then, he looked around and raised his eyebrows. Shall we begin? Begin. David nodded heavily and waved his hand behind him. Rustle, 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 rustle. Dozens of gray space members crouched down and held the short metal pipes in their hands tightly, as if they were holding a fragile crystal. They carefully moved forward in a single file in the field, and kept moving closer to the farm, at this time, on a mountain road more than 10 miles away from the farm. Haha, thank you very much for escorting me here safely. This is the territory of my good friend's family. I've sent someone to greet them. I'm sure someone will come to greet me soon. After pausing for a while, Zachary made a half bow with a sincere look and said politely, "Sirs, how about you come with me to my good friend's territory so that I can invite my good friend to entertain you too to express his gratitude?" This was undoubtedly a polite remark. Zachary certainly knew the temperament of the two people in front of him. Sure enough, Owens shook his head with a smile. "Haha, thank you for your kind invitation, Sir Zachary. But this is what we clergymen should do. We really don't deserve such gratitude. Well, I can only say sorry." "Oh, that's a pity." As expected of an old man, Zachary was a genuine actor. Hearing this, he shook his head slightly, and his expression was full of unconcealable disappointment. On the other hand, Sylvia looked at the surrounding barren mountains and frowned slightly. "Sir Zachary, are you sure your good friend can guarantee your safety?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but looking at the injuries of your guards, that bad guy should be very strong." "Haha, my lord, there's something you don't know. The reason why the guards were injured was because they accidentally stepped into the trap set by that bad guy. That's why they ended up in such a sorry state." Zachary was obviously prepared. He said the excuse he had made up and said confidently, "But it's fine now. My good friend is a local viscount and also a general who returned from the battlefield. His identity naturally can't be compared to the two of you, my lords. But he still has some elite soldiers under his command. I've already informed him of what happened before, so there's absolutely no problem in terms of safety." Pause for a while, he continued to smile easily. "Haha, besides, although that bad guy isn't weak, he didn't dare to make a move on me these 2 days. Obviously, when he saw the two of you coming, he was afraid. Maybe he had already given up on escaping." Since Zachary had already said so, Xia Weian and Owens naturally couldn't say anything more. Their mission was to escort Zachary here, and now they had accomplished their mission. Even if there were any changes in the future, it had nothing to do with them. Sylvia and Owens looked at each other. Although they were a little puzzled that Zachary seemed to be eager to drive them away, they didn't think much about it and were about to bow and leave. Suddenly, a voice mixed with a sense of ridicule was heard. "Fear in the heart? Haha, are you sure?" Her body stiffened. Hearing this extremely familiar voice, Sylvia's expression was a little incredulous. Then, she slowly turned her head. Her eyes were sharp like knives as she stared at the left hill in front of her, at the figure that kept appearing in her dreams in the middle of the night. She gritted her teeth. Tang. Yes. Chapter 761. Tang. Yes. Although the morning mist had yet to disperse and the figure on the hill looked blurry, Xia Weian's intuition strongly reminded her that she definitely did not recognize the wrong person. "Ha ha!" Light laughter came from the morning fog. The blurry figure waved his hand and said in a noncommittal tone, "Long time no see, Sylvia.
It's you.
It's him. Zachary on the side came back to his senses and subconsciously took a few steps back. His expression changed instantly. He pointed at the figure and said hurriedly, "My two lords, this is the bad guy who has been chasing me." Owens raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He glanced at Xiao Weian, whose body was tense like a bow ready to strike. He stretched out his hand and untied the long spear hanging on the side of the horse. He was also full of fighting spirit. Owens did not know Tang En, but this did not hinder his determination to get back at him. After all, the scene that happened on the ship was really embarrassing. "Good! You dare!" Sylvia's lips were tightly pressed into a line. She said each word stiffly, as if it was squeezed out from between her teeth. Then she took a deep breath. With a serious expression, she slowly raised the long spear and pointed it at the top of the hill. "Since you dare to come, then come down and die. Come down and die, come down and die." Sylvia suddenly roared the last 4 words, shaking the mountain and echoing continuously. Owens was startled. He naturally knew Sylvia's character very well. She was a person who liked to do more than talk. If she had already recognized the other party as an enemy, she would not talk nonsense and would not listen to the other party's filthy words. She would directly smash the other party with her spear and beat them to death. It was really rare for her to express such strong emotions before a battle. In any case, we're acquaintances. There's no need to be so passionate about fighting and killing upon meeting. Tang En rubbed his nose and unconsciously avoided the burning gazes from below. He slowly walked down the hill. "Actually, I'm here for Zachary this time." Sigh. Before he could finish speaking, whoosh, a devastating and dazzling tyrannical spear aura had already pierced through the thin morning mist, whistling through the air. With a sigh and a shake of his head, Tang En's figure flickered slightly, and he instantly moved over 100 feet away from his original spot. Boom! The hill trembled slightly, and soil and rocks flew everywhere. A huge crater was instantly opened up halfway up the hill. Brandishing her spear, Sylvia stepped forward and squinted her eyes. "If you want to kill him, you have to get through me first." Swish! Swish! Owens brandished his spear and stepped forward with a warm smile on his face. "Me too." "Ha ha!" Shaking his head and chuckling, Tang En spread his hands and continued walking. "Actually, you know that it's not easy for me to defeat you. But if I just want to kill Zachary, you can't stop me." Sylvia pursed her lips and her expression became even more solemn. This was the truth. Previously, both sides had been chasing each other for more than a month, so Sylvia was naturally very clear about Tang En's ability. If Tang En was bent on killing Zachary, then they really might not be able to stop him. This was not a matter of strength, but of speed. This was also the reason why Sylvia had restrained herself until now and did not directly attack. Owens was naturally aware of this situation. Although it was a bit embarrassing to say it, after the battle of pure attack speed on the boat, he now had no confidence in his spear technique being able to block the opponent's assassination attack. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the sallow-faced middle-aged man in front of him. "Tang En? Well, no matter what, you're still a martial arts expert. There's no need to use such underhanded means to threaten me." This was an out-and-out provocation, but Owens did not hide it. Because as long as it was an expert, more or less, they would be a little arrogant. This was not a derogatory meaning, but confidence in one's own strength. 200 feet away, Tang En stopped in his tracks and looked at Owens. He tilted his head and thought for a while, then the corner of his mouth rose. "Okay, then let's have a fair fight, so that you'll be convinced." These words were spoken resolutely and decisively, powerful and resonating. Owens could not help but feel happy when he heard this. He was about to solemnly nod and agree to this battle. But, Owens, don't believe him. As long as it comes from his mouth, even if it's a word, never believe it. Moving sideways, Sylvia cautiously blocked in front of Zachary, her expression gloomy. Because this is a damn guy who never knows what dignity and morality are. Owens was stunned. Then he looked at Tang En, who shook his head helplessly with a "you saw through me" look. Cold sweat slowly dripped down from his temples. Damn it! Beat him at his own game? I was almost fooled, wasn't I? Hee, it's the first time we meet, so I'm just joking. Don't mind. Looking at Owens's somewhat hurt expression, Tang En innocently spread his hands and casually glossed over this little episode. You really think that way? Owens's mouth twitched, and he was completely speechless. For a moment, he only felt that his IQ was seriously not enough. At this moment there was a sudden roar. Do it! Seeing that Tang En's gaze moved away from her, Sylvia's eyes flashed. She stepped on the ground, and her figure decisively rushed forward. At the same time, the long spear that was piercing straight ahead soared with blazing flames, wantonly dancing enchantingly with awe-inspiring power. Playing a sneak attack. You've also become bad. Curling his lips, Tang En naturally would not be hit by this simple sneak attack. As he complained, his figure gently swayed away like a willow catkin in the wind. However, before he landed on the ground, hiss hiss hiss, the slight but concentrated sound of something breaking through the air instantly assaulted his side. It was Owens, who had arrived just in time to attack. Tang En's expression did not change. He slowly raised his right hand as if it were an illusion. A dagger had appeared in his palm at some point, and he pointed it out. Ding! There was a clear sound of collision, and the spear shadows that filled the sky instantly disappeared. Seeing that his exquisite spear technique was instantly broken, Owens was not discouraged. He sidestepped to avoid Tang En's knife, and Sylvia's long spear had already smashed down from behind. Good! Seeing such complementary tacit cooperation, Tang En could not help but praise sincerely. He instantly retracted his dagger and dodged to the side. Whoosh! Even though Sylvia's tyrannical spear did not hit its target, in the midst of the whistling sound, the strong wind still caused a gully that was several feet long, and fresh soil rolled out. On the other side, Tang En, who had just dodged, was once again entangled by Owens's spear shadows that filled the sky. It had to be said that Sylvia and Owens were indeed the most suitable partners. Sylvia's attack was tyrannical and direct, and it was powerful. Owens's spear technique was delicate and flawless, delicate and meticulous. It was exactly one hard and one soft, one main attack and one entangled. It was seamless and perfect. Putting away her long spear, Sylvia glanced at Owens, who was already struggling. She did not immediately go to help, but turned to the light knights who were gradually surrounding them and shouted, "Retreat! Take Sir Zachary away from here, quickly!" This was the real purpose of Sylvia's attack. If she let Tang En assassinate first, she was not sure that she could guarantee Zachary's safety. So, only by entangling Tang En first, and then letting Zachary and the knights who could not intervene leave, she and Owens could fight without any worries. Tang En's eyes flickered when he heard her words, and his face was fierce. He snorted coldly, "Humph, you want to leave?" His hands suddenly opened wide, and his black robe fluttered. The crisscrossing blood-colored blade light surged out violently, and instantly suppressed the spear shadows that filled the sky. Roar! Looking up and roaring, Owens knew that the critical moment had come. The warm smile that had been hanging on the corner of his mouth disappeared, and it was replaced by a deep and dignified expression. The holy spear shadows in his palm were like a torrent that was released from the dam, surging in an instant, and the sea was wanton. As soon as the blood-colored blade and the pure and holy spear shadow came into contact, an intense confrontation erupted between the two of them. Red and white mixed together, mixed with specks of sparks that would occasionally collide. It was a magnificent and fatal beauty that dazzled one's eyes. In a sense, the attacking style of Tang En and Owens was very similar. They both won with speed and relied on subtle attacks that were impossible to resist to defeat the opponent. In this way, the only difference was the depth of the realm of the two sides. Soon, the spear shadows that filled the sky with explosive hand speed were suppressed again. Owens knew that the reason why he was defeated in the last battle on the ship was obviously not because of his state. Fortunately, before Owens's decline expanded, Sylvia had already rushed over with her spear. However, she did not use the overbearing spear technique that was big and wide. Instead, she used the delicate spear technique that she was not good at. Their primary goal now was not to risk their lives, but to entangle Tang En as much as possible and let Zachary and the others completely withdraw from the battle circle. However, this kind of attack method that used speed to fight speed was obviously not suitable for Sylvia. Although her talent was outstanding and she had trained hard for this for a long time, and she could be considered to have some small achievements, it was obvious that she still could not keep up with the rhythm of Tang En and Owens. However, Sylvia did not give up. She was willing to be Owens's assistant. She struggled to support the dense spear net and not be broken by Tang En's sharp blade light. Of course, this kind of simple cooperation naturally would not bring any threat to Tang En. The corners of his mouth gradually rose, revealing a sly smile of success. After a fleeting moment, his long and narrow eyes suddenly narrowed. A blade light suddenly separated from the whole body. Like a swimming fish, it crookedly passed through the dense spear net and stabbed Owens's heart. Roar! At the critical moment, Sylvia let out a sharp and long cry. Her fancy spear technique suddenly changed. It was just a simple smash, but an indomitable and tragic murderous aura instantly filled the place. Boom! The airwaves rolled like the clouds in the dark rain. The dazzling fighting light directly exploded. Rays of holy light radiated in all directions, shining brilliantly. A stifled groan and a delighted laugh. 3 figures flew out from the center of the explosion respectively. They landed and rolled, then patted the ground and stood up. Cough cough. A few coughs came from the gray airwaves. A blurry figure suddenly staggered. He leaned on the ground with his spear and stood firmly. Then, he raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head to look at the bleeding hole on his left shoulder and shook his head slightly. Owens? Sylvia's voice came from another direction. Then, the airwaves in the field, together with the hazy morning fog, were instantly swept away by a swift and fierce wind from the spear. I'm fine, who? Gasping for breath, Owens raised his hand and drew a few mysterious gestures in front of his chest. A little white light appeared out of thin air. The next moment, under the guidance of the light, it went straight into the hole on his left shoulder, barely stopping the bleeding. It was just a simple healing magic. As a Holy Knight captain, Owens could naturally easily cast it. However, although he was injured, Owens's expression did not have any ruthlessness. On the contrary, there was a bit of joy. Just now, if Sylvia had not reacted quickly and decisively swung her spear to smash the blade, then this hole would have appeared on his heart. The scene returned to normal again. Except for Tang En and the other two who stood at a distance in a triangular position, Zachary and a large group of Knights of Light had disappeared. Obviously, they had taken advantage of the time when they were fighting to stay far away. Seeing this, Sylvia could not help but feel relieved. She slightly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then, she narrowed her eyes and turned to stare at Tang En. There was a faint madness in her eyes that was constantly gathering. Ha! Tang En did not feel anything. He did not look regretful that he had let Zachary go. Instead, he chuckled twice, and the corner of his mouth revealed a few traces of ridicule. You guys, do you know who that Zachary is? You protected him without any principles. He answered his own question. There's no harm in telling you. He is the person in charge of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild. TSK. When did the Holy Temple of Light get together with the Dirty Bounty Hunter Guild? They even sent 2 Holy Knight captains to protect him. Haha, interesting, really interesting. The mocking laughter echoed in the field, but Sylvia was not moved at all. She pursed her lips and said coldly, "Nonsense." Tang En laughed and shook his head. "Ha, I knew you wouldn't believe it. Well, if I said that the Temple of Light sent a team of reinforcements, including holy knight captains like you, and a few magicians wearing white robes with a golden cross embroidered on their chest, waiting for Zachary at the farm 10 miles away, you wouldn't believe it either, right?" Sylvia did not say a word. She was miserably deceived by Tang En, so no matter what Tang En said, her mind would automatically add the sentence, "This is a lie." She basically would not believe it. But Owens was different. He frowned slightly and thought to himself, "A golden cross embroidered on their chest, that means they are the high priests of the Temple of Light. The people of the Temple of Light would not easily leave the headquarters. Very few outsiders knew about it. Could it be that this Tang En had really seen it?" Thinking about it again, and thinking of Zachary's vague intention to send them away, his heart faintly believed it. After all, Owens was different from Sylvia. Although his belief in the God of Light was firm, he was meticulous and did not fear to doubt. Previously, he doubted the authenticity of the miracle in Emoma City, and that was an example. "Tisk, no matter how much nonsense you talk, you can't escape death today." With a cold snort, Sylvia did not want to listen to Tang En's nonsense anymore. In other words, she did not want to see Tang En speak again. She turned her long spear, and the blazing fighting aura wantonly rose again. It seemed to be slow but was actually fast. "Come on, do I need to lie to you?" Besides, shrugging his shoulders, Tang En's mouth hung a faint smile. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and quickly retreated. "You can't beat me." "Humph." With a cold snort, Sylvia had already entered a crazy fighting state. Of course, she would not pay attention to this kind of talk. Although Owens had already somewhat believed Tang En's words, it was naturally inappropriate to say it at this time. Without hesitation, he also grabbed his long spear and attacked Tang En. At this time, on the farm, the sun in the east had not completely peeked out when it was covered by a large cloud, which seemed to indicate that today's weather would not be too good. However, no matter how fickle the weather was, when the faint roar of Tang En and others fighting came, no one would think that it was thunder in the clouds. Dozens of figures walked out from all over the farm. They frowned and looked up at the mountain range in the north. "What's going on?" A middle-aged man wearing the same armor as Owens turned to look at the Earth Stage warrior next to him. He was the guard sent by Zachary to act as the vanguard. "Isn't that the direction you came from?" I don't know, sir. It was still fine when we came." "Could it be?" The Earth Stage warrior's expression changed. "The person who chased us before made a move again? The assassin who may have touched the threshold of void level." This middle-aged man obviously also heard the Earth Stage warrior's report before. He frowned even more. To be able to create such a scene. It should be Sylvia and Owens fighting with the other party. This is troublesome. A few of the Temple of Light's big shots, who were obviously of high status, also frowned when they heard this. They were silent. This so-called trouble was, of course, not referring to the assassin who may have touched the threshold of void level. It should be known that the team that came this time was very strong. Even if the other party was a real void-level powerhouse, they still had the power to fight. But Sylvia and Owens, just as Tang En had expected, Sylvia and Owens did not know about the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. Those present who knew about it did not dare to let them know. Especially Sylvia. Once she knew about this and investigated it, there would definitely be a big mess and even shake the foundation of the temple. After pondering for a while, the middle-aged man decisively ordered the Earth Stage warriors. "The meeting plan is cancelled. You all rush back now. If it really is that assassin, you all will help Sylvia and the others to defeat the other party. Then, let Zachary find an excuse to change his direction. As for the time and place of the next meeting, we will find another opportunity to inform you." Obviously, compared to the safety of Zachary and the others, the middle-aged man was undoubtedly more worried that Sylvia would find out about this. Yes. The Earth Stage warriors naturally had no status in front of these people. They nodded dryly when they heard this. All right, go. With a wave of his hand, the middle-aged man turned around and said to a few elders wearing white robes with a golden cross embroidered on their chests, "Everyone, in order to prevent any accidents, we should also seize the time to retreat." His words paused. The middle-aged man's gaze shifted upwards and stared blankly at the sky above the western rooftop. About a dozen fireballs were flying at a low altitude. In an instant, they traversed hundreds of feet of thin gauze morning fog and smashed down like meteorites. Further behind, a dozen fireballs were rising slowly. Their target was still this farm. He muttered in a low voice, "What is this? Boom! Boom! Boom!" In an instant, it was as if dozens of evil dragons had raised their heads and roared. Streaks of fire soared into the sky. Immediately after, the rolling air waves radiated in a ring. The space rippled, and the row upon row of low farmhouses, as if they were made of sand, were directly crushed into dregs by this terrifying force. Boom! 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 The wave of explosions had not yet stopped when dozens of fireballs were thrown down from behind. Another wave of destructive force swept across the farm again, cleansing the space. This was only the prelude. Those seemingly ordinary but actually powerful fireballs were still rising slowly from the west. They did not let go of any corner of the farm. It seemed that they were determined to raze this place to the ground. They would not stop until the underground water gushed out. What farm, what Earth Stage warriors, what Holy Knight Commander, what Templar High Priest. At this moment, they were all ants. They were all dust. Because this was the end of the world. Chapter 762. The morning fog was gray, and the rising sun from the east was completely hidden behind the clouds. It seemed that it could not bear to look at the scene of the farm in the mountains. Of course, no one could see the outline of the farm at this time. There was only the blazing fire that soared into the sky, and the rolling air waves and thick smoke. Occasionally there would be some white light flashing in the air. Those were a few oval-shaped things that looked like duck eggs, and they were hurriedly flying away. Looking closer, it turned out that they were a few old men who were holding up a magic shield. Their originally white hair had turned yellow and withered, and their originally holy white robes were also covered in black ash. Their mouths were wide open, and their faces were extremely twisted and ferocious. Shock, fear, despair. All kinds of negative emotions were mixed together and gathered together. It was probably the final struggle before death. Unfortunately, in the next moment, a circular air wave swept past with spatial ripples. The thick and condensed magic shield was like a fragile soap bubble, and it shattered and turned into nothingness. F***ck. In the field, David squatted down and looked up, staring blankly at the Templar mage who had turned into ashes. He opened his mouth, and only after a long while did he manage to hold back a curse. David was clear that there were about 100 people in the team of the Temple of Light in the farm. It could be said that each of them was not weak, and could be considered a top elite team of the Temple of Light. However, now that the powerful Templar mage had ended up like this, there was no need to think about those holy knights and priests. Harry, who was at the side, was not much better. He looked at the destroyed farm in a daze and muttered unconsciously, F***ck. This little thing, its power is so terrifying. The so-called little thing was naturally the short metal cannon barrel that the dozens of members of the Grey Space were constantly fiddling with beside them. Loading, shifting, stabilizing the cannon body, a few simple actions, boom! A stream of fire jumped out of the cannon mouth. Needless to say, this was naturally the battlefield killing weapon that Z had personally designed and successfully modified by Lena over many years. Previously, when Tang En received Lena's letter, It was about the successful modification and production of this killing weapon. He had to admit that this news came at the right time. When Tang En saw that Sylvia and Owens had suddenly come to disrupt the situation, and also learned that there was an elite team from the Temple of Light coming to reinforce them, Tang En really wanted to give up at that time. This had nothing to do with whether he was confident or not. It was just that in the face of such a huge force, assassination methods, schemes, and so on were not worth mentioning. If he were to force his way in, he would most likely be crushed to smithereens. However, after learning that Lena had completed the modification of the killing weapon, everything changed. Z had suppressed this killing weapon for more than 10 years. Apart from the barbarians in the northern wilderness who had a deep understanding of it, very few people in the entire Size continent knew about it. Bran, in particular, had no idea what was going on. And this gave Tang En room to operate. Now, this operation was bringing about doomsday effects. The metal tube was still trembling. Because they had just started operating it not long ago, the members of the Gray Space were very nervous. They meticulously followed the operation steps and did not have the leisure to watch the firing effect, so they were not as shocked as David and Harry. Among them, the member closest to David and Harry raised his head slightly and was startled. Then, he turned his head and asked, "Captain, do we continue?" Just by looking at the thick smoke rising into the sky, the fate of the small farm could be imagined. That was why he asked this question. Hearing this, Harry was stunned. Then, the corners of his mouth twitched subconsciously. The shock from before was instantly covered by a pained expression. The power of this unknown gadget was indeed terrifying, but the price they had to pay for it was not small. Because the fireballs that were fired were actually expensive explosive crystals. Attack. Continue attacking. David did not think much and waved his hand decisively. Wait. Harry hurriedly grabbed David's arm and pointed to the explosion seen not far away. Do you think anyone can survive under this kind of abnormally strong bombardment? Slightly stunned, I don't think so. This was the truth. Under this kind of indiscriminate bombardment, let alone the unprepared temple team, even the well-prepared void-level cultivators would have to think about how to escape from here as quickly as possible instead of courting death to resist. However, David scratched his head, thought for a while, and said, "But the boss said before that we must use up all the explosive crystals we brought this time." And listen to the boss continue. Yes. Oh. Hearing this, Harry clutched his chest and leaned back. His expression was tangled, as if a large piece of his heart had been dug out. The way he looked at the sky also changed. What kind of fireball was this? It was clearly a sky full of gold coins. Too extravagant. Too wasteful. Too unbearable. More than 10 miles east of the town, in the thorny barren land. Huff. Huff. Panting heavily, Zachary ran alone in the barren land, not distinguishing between east and west. Even though the thorny bushes cut through his clothes and skin, he did not seem to feel it. From time to time, he would look back in a panic, listening to the faint screams behind him. His face was pale, his lips trembled, and there was a look of panic on his face. I've already escaped. Hoochie. They don't know the direction I chose. Yes, those Knights of Light can also buy me some time, at least 5 minutes, that's right. Hoochie. As long as I find a hidden place to hide, nobody can find me. The nervous murmur seemed to give Zachary a lot of confidence, and his footsteps became faster as he ran for his life. It had to be said that Tang En's precise control of a small area had reached an astonishing level. Sylvia and Owens thought that as long as they delayed Tang En, they could smoothly let the large group of knights protect Zachary and escape. But who would have thought that this was within Tang En's expectations? Not long after Zachary withdrew from the battle, he was assassinated by more than 10 unknown people. In fact, they were the members of the Gray Space led by Michaud. Although the strength of the light knights was good in this rugged mountain, they could not use their riding tactics at all. In an instant, they fell into a disadvantage under the many strange assassination methods of Michaud and others. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zachary was naturally the first to escape. The light knights also cooperated with him, desperately entangling Michaud and others to protect him. Of course, he ran away, but the fate of the light knights was undoubtedly doomed. Ah! Another scream faintly came from behind, and Zachary's body could not help but tremble as he ran. His feet staggered, and he rolled down the gentle slope in embarrassment. Fortunately, this gentle slope was not long. After crushing a section of thorns, Zachary struggled to get up from the ground with a bloody face. "Damn it, huh!" he cursed as he looked up, and his expression could not help but be stunned. Not far away, one after another, low mounds were endless, filling the entire line of sight. Near each mound there was a gray stone tablet standing alone. Under the gray gauze of the morning fog, it looked dense and lonely. Cemetery? Bah! After recognizing this scene, Zachary could not help but secretly curse his bad luck, his face ugly. This scene, coupled with his own situation, made it difficult for him not to think of something bad. Right at this moment, bang, bang, bang. It was like a thunderclap had erupted in the horizon, and dense and muffled sounds of rumbling resounded in succession, causing one's mind to be shaken and awed. Zachary could not help but be stunned when he heard the sound. He subconsciously looked in the direction of the farm and was completely dumbfounded. What's going on? Is there a fight there too? And this momentum? Is it a battle between Void Masters? Trembling, Zachary did not dare to hesitate. He no longer cared about his bad luck and rushed into the cemetery. But after only running a dozen steps and turning around a mound, Zachary's footsteps could not help but stop again. In the mist more than 10 meters away, on top of a tombstone, a slightly short black shadow was sitting on it, carrying a huge scythe on its shoulder and swinging its legs in the air. It seemed to be a little bored, humming an unknown soothing tune with its head down, leisurely and contentedly. It had to be said that this scene was a bit strange. At least Zachary was shocked, trying to squint his old eyes, his heart beating fast. Human? Ghost? Death god? Just as Zachary was making a lot of judgments in his mind, the soothing tune suddenly stopped. The short shadow seemed to have noticed his gaze and raised its head to look at him. Tilting its head, it seemed to be a little girl and smiled vaguely. It was a very satisfied smile. "Oh, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Your Excellency Zachary." Chapter 763. Tall and sturdy, malnourished trees, grotesquely shaped rocks, small patches of grass, large patches of shrubs, and perhaps some birds and beasts. In short, it was a very ordinary hill. But at this moment, rustling sounds could be heard, the leaves were swaying, the rocks were moving, the grass was trembling, and the birds and beasts were fleeing. The mountain was trembling slightly and constantly. Finally, with a boom, the left side of the mountain was directly broken from the inside and exploded. A dazzling holy light shot out from the hole, instantly cutting through the gray morning fog. It was also at this moment, whoosh! A figure with a long afterimage suddenly leaped out, landing on the ground and rolling sideways. He looked very disheveled, but it was undeniable that he had escaped the range of the holy light at the most critical moment. Before it could get up, it slapped the ground, and with a bang, the figure flew out at a 90-degree angle close to the ground. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the left side of the mountain once again broke through the sharp spear light, completely covering the place where the figure had been, and creating rows of terrifying bottomless pits. After dodging the predictive attack with extreme precision, the illusory figure was very happy. "Haha, I told you, you can't beat me. Ah, you can't even hit me now." Before the voice finished speaking, 2 more figures jumped out of the cave with a whoosh. Their armor was still lofty, but it was stained with the black mountain dust, and was no longer holy. As the two figures jumped out, suddenly, a little bit of the left side of the mountain collapsed, and the ancient trees fell, boulders rolled, and dust flew everywhere. In an instant, it was a pile of ruins. As if she didn't feel anything, Sylvia casually shook off her broken right shoulder armor, and with a serious expression and crazed eyes, she waved her spear and was about to attack again. However, after a few coughs, Owens, who was one step behind, was the most pathetic. Although he hadn't lost his ability to fight, the bloodstains all over his body were a shocking sight. Xia Weian stopped in her tracks and turned around to take a look. She frowned slightly. "I'm fine again." Owens took a deep breath, and his fingers holding the spear trembled slightly, as if he was excited and nervous. In fact, he was twitching. In terms of overall strength, Owens was undoubtedly the weakest of the three. Not to mention that he had been tricked by Tang En in the beginning and injured his left arm. For example, he was tasked with fighting Tang En head-on in terms of attack speed, so the pressure he faced was actually heavier than Sylvia's. Therefore, it was reasonable for him to end up in such a sorry state. "He still want to fight?" Tang En spread out his hands from 100 meters away and said in a joking tone, "I admit that it's very difficult to kill martial arts geniuses like you. I'll definitely have to pay a heavy price. But, haha, don't blame me for being too frank. It's impossible for you to kill me. You can't even defeat me. Do you still want to continue?" These words were half true and half false. It was undeniable that psychological warfare was involved. After this short fight, Tang En learned a lot about the tacit cooperation between Sylvia and Owens. He had to admit that the cooperation between the two of them was perfect. Although Owens was in a sorry state, he had been holding back and limiting the intensity of Tang En's attacks. As for Xia Weian, there was no need to say anything. She had always been domineering and overbearing. The collapse of the mountain next to her was the best proof of that. To be honest, Tang En was also a little troubled by such cooperation. They were like hedgehogs, and he basically couldn't do it. For the time being, he could only resort to psychological warfare and verbal attack. Of course, at the same time, Tang En really didn't want to fight anymore. Because calculating the time, it was time to start at the farm, and it was time to finish at Zachary's side. The mission was completed successfully, and there was indeed no more value in risking their lives. Sylvia pursed her lips, and her expression was still stubborn and crazy. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something. Suddenly, boom, boom, boom. The ground trembled slightly, as if an earth dragon had awakened below. Tang En raised his eyebrows and suddenly turned to look in the direction of the farm. He looked overjoyed. "Aha, it's done. Damn." Before the joy spread from the corners of his mouth, Tang En suddenly jumped up in a sorry state. A tyrannical long spear instantly blasted the place where he was standing just now. Without waiting for the soil and stones to splash, the long spear went forward again and chased after him. Needless to say, the attacker was naturally Sylvia. Tang En's sudden distraction had undoubtedly given her a great opportunity. If she couldn't even grasp this opportunity, she would be ashamed of the bloody storms she had experienced for more than 10 years. Owens naturally wouldn't fall behind when Sylvia attacked. Although he had some distracting thoughts about the continuous explosions, his coordination was not the slightest bit careless. The two masters joined forces in an instant and immediately forced Tang En into a disadvantageous position. However, Tang En was not afraid at this time. As long as the farm was settled, the purpose of this trip would be more than half completed, and there was no more pressure in his heart. Now he could advance or retreat. As long as he got a chance to escape, no one could stop him. In a relaxed state of mind, Tang En dealt with the attacks of the two people while squinting and smiling. "Haha, do you know what this explosion? Well, what it means?" While speaking intermittently, he avoided Sylvia's heavy spear. "Do you still remember what I said before? The blade trembled and instantly suppressed Owen's counterattacking spear net. "That's right, the ones being bombarded are your temple's reinforcements. Hee, more than 100 people, and many experts, just like that, they disappeared into thin air and turned into dust." The dense spear net suddenly paused. Owens was indeed stunned. It should be known that he somewhat believed what Tang En had said before. Now that he heard this shocking news, his heart was shocked, and his hands naturally slowed down. Tang En was an expert at finding loopholes. He could naturally accurately grasp such an obvious flaw. With a long laugh, he decisively threw away Owens and pounced on Sylvia. Good. Although the situation of the battle was reversed, Sylvia did not have the slightest intention of avoiding. The spear trembled slightly, and she judged the distance between them, looking for the most suitable time to attack. Now is the time. A sharp light flashed in her eyes. Sylvia decisively swung her arm and smashed the spear down. The force was heavy and the wind whistled. Tang En did not dodge. His long and narrow eyes almost narrowed into slits as he stared at the spear smashing toward his head. The corners of his mouth suddenly rose, and he slowly raised his left hand. It was gentle as if there was no trace of smoke or fire, but when the whistling spear was infinitely approaching, he raised his hand to the top of his head and brushed away the spear, catching the spear with bare hands? Or Sylvia's spear? If this was spread out, he would be regarded as shameless bragging, and his face would be covered in saliva. But now that was the truth. Oh, that was not right, because Tang En's left palm was still a few inches away from the spear. It seemed infinitely close, but also infinitely far away. It looked very awkward. In fact, Sylvia felt even more awkward. Just a moment ago, when she saw Tang En catching her spear with his bare hands, she thought that his brain had suddenly gone haywire, and she was delighted. However, in the next moment, Sylvia felt a strange force coming from the spear, and she instantly frowned. That was not right. The force was not right. The distance was also not right. The spear was clearly only a few inches away from Tang En's palm, and even the top of his head, but Sylvia felt that her spear had already fallen a long distance, and the force of the spear had also been silently absorbed by more than half. This feeling, it was as if the distance of a few inches was actually a bottomless lake in the middle, and it was also absorbing and dispersing the force of the falling object. The power of space. After a slight daze, Sylvia immediately recognized the source of this strange feeling. At this moment, Tang En's face suddenly turned pale, and he could no longer hold on. He was only at the stage of exploring the use of space power, and it was not systematic. Naturally, it was impossible for him to completely withstand Sylvia's attack. Fortunately, he only needed the spear to stop for a moment. He took half a step forward, closed in on Sylvia, and thrust the blood dagger forward. "You can't beat me, ah!" she screamed. Sylvia was still Sylvia. Although she was caught off guard, she made the right choice, and that was to use all her strength to stimulate the fighting aura around her body, and the fighting aura armor appeared again outside the steel armor. Bang! The bloody light suddenly shone brightly in the narrow space. Sylvia only felt a tightness in her chest, and her delicate body unconsciously leaned back and flew backward. At the same time, the god's armor on her chest shattered inch by inch and kept falling off. Tang En groaned, and blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that he was not in a good condition. However, his agility was not affected at all. He seized this obvious loophole and rushed out instantly. "Be careful." Owens's belated warning came, and this time, Tang En was already more than 10 feet away. He turned his head and looked at Sylvia, who was flying parallel to him on the left side. His eyes unconsciously moved down and fell on the curve of her underwear that was sticking up high as the breastplate shattered. He raised his eyebrows slightly and opened his mouth silently. Wow, women were always sensitive to the eyes that fell on them, not to mention that Sylvia also turned her head at this time. In an instant, his blood surged up along with his explosive anger. His pale face suddenly turned red, and there was a sweet taste in his throat. He opened his mouth, and a large amount of blood mist came out. Puff! Chapter 764. Heh, I've been waiting for you for a long time, Your Excellency Zachary. Although the scene was a little strange and the voice was a little cold and ethereal, there was a hint of joy in the tone, so it did not exceed the scope of a human. But somehow, when the voice entered Zachary's ears, it was as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his head. It seeped into the deepest part of his body, as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. The next moment, before he could recover, there was a slight sound of clothes fluttering. The short figure stepped on the tombstone and leaped into the air. When she reached the highest point, she stretched her body and raised the black scythe high up like a bow, slashing down with a whoosh. Is it really a little girl? What a joke! Although Zachary was old, and had not fought for many years, he was still the person in charge of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Naturally, he had the strength. Seeing this, he was stunned at first, then he subconsciously rolled to the side and dodged in a sorry state. Looking up, he had just taken out a short sword from his waist. Before he could get up, Zachary's vision suddenly darkened. The huge scythe was already in front of him. In shock, he hurriedly waved his sword to block. Ding! With a crisp sound of collision, the short sword flew high into the air and instantly disappeared into the gray mist. It flew to an unknown place. Then, with a bang, Zachary felt a pain in his chest. As if he had been hit by a galloping horse, he flew backward. Whoosh! The chain rolled back and wrapped around his arm. Raising her hand, the little girl calmly caught the huge scythe that was spinning rapidly. She frowned slightly and looked at Zachary, who was struggling to get up after hitting the mound. I've been waiting for you for a long time, but you can't even take one strike from me. Her faint voice did not hide her disappointment and regret. Zachary's old face heated up. Even with his rich experience, he could not help but feel that his self-esteem had been severely damaged. But more than that, he was shocked. Who are you? Sorry. With a calm gaze, the little girl took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Zachary. The strange blade light appeared again. I don't think there's a need to introduce myself. Her words were not pleasant to the ears, but that was the actual situation now. Most of the otherworldly weapons were sabers, swords, and spears. It was rare for warriors to use a scythe as a common weapon. It was not only because of the concept, but also because of the common problem of new things, which was that there was no complete attack and defense system. If he were to recklessly play around with it, it was very likely that he would be injured by this strange blade light. And this little girl, little Carol, was undoubtedly the lucky one. She had Tang En, a close combat expert, to give her pointers. She also had the old butler and the system, a powerful shield, secretly supporting her from behind. Therefore, she was very good at using the scythe. And once one became familiar with this kind of unpopular weapon, the power it could unleash would also become quite terrifying. Streaks of strange blade light came from all sorts of unbelievable angles. Zachary's body was old, and he was not good at dodging in the first place. The only thing he could rely on was his rich combat experience, but it was useless in front of this completely novel attack method. He was completely stunned in an instant and fell into a precarious situation. 100 meters away from this one-sided battle, a figure stood quietly behind the tombstone. The eyes under the silver mask flickered with a somewhat complicated expression. In the next moment, he seemed to have felt something. His body suddenly shook, but then he relaxed again. He turned his head and saw a middle-aged man with a sallow face silently walking over. Yes, boss, Michaud nodded. And how is it? Tang En narrowed his eyes at the battle scene under the gray fog and asked casually. Shaking his head, Michaud spread out his hands and said, from the current situation. I don't think I have a chance to protect her. This was the truth. After a brief observation, Tang Yen could see that there was no suspense in this battle. The reason why it had dragged on until now was because little Carol had not used her full strength. Withdrawing his gaze, Tang Yen waved his hand and said, "Clean up the traces and tell your people to retreat." "Yes." Michaud nodded lightly and retreated into the gray fog like a ghost, disappearing in an instant. "It's finally over." Tang Yen sighed emotionally, shook his head, and stepped forward. At this time, the battle in the field was also coming to an end. Little Carol was indeed playing, and she was also venting her dissatisfaction. It must be known that this opportunity was fought for with great difficulty, and she had waited here for a long time. Previously, Tang Yen said that he had an important mission for her, and that was to capture the other party's hidden big boss alive. Originally, little Carol was still happy that she was valued, and she excitedly came with her scythe. But who would have thought that this boss was too weak? Well, since this is the case, let's end it. Little Carol, whose interest was exhausted, narrowed her eyes, and the power of her blade suddenly increased. In an instant, Zachary, who was barely able to resist, was trapped in a net of blades. Seeing the opportunity, the blade flipped over and quickly lashed out like a long whip. Zachary, who was already dizzy, was naturally unable to resist. He felt a pain in his shoulder, and with a bang, his body spun and flew out horizontally. If there were no accidents, Zachary would smash a tombstone in the next moment, and his head would bleed, and he would faint. But at this moment, a figure suddenly turned out from behind the tombstone, shook his head, and stretched out his hand. "It's very impolite to disturb the rest of the deceased." After saying this, a hand knife directly knocked Zachary unconscious. "Brother." Little Carol pursed her lips, put away her scythe, and walked over. "You lied to me again," Tang Yen mentioned Zachary with an innocent face. "How did I lie to you?" "You said." Opening her mouth, little Carol was stunned to find that she had nothing to say. Because Tang Yen had done what he promised before, including arranging an important mission for her, and coming here to wait. In the end, Zachary did come. As for Zachary's strength, she forgot to ask, and of course, Brother Tang Yen wouldn't tell her. After holding it in for a moment, little Carol could only scare him with a frosty face. "Brother is so treacherous." How can you say that about your brother? It's very sad, isn't it? Besides, it's not the first day you know your brother, haha." With a loud laugh, Tang Yen shrugged without any pressure, and then put his arm around little Carol's shoulder. "Okay, it's over. Let's go, let's retreat." Soon, the cemetery was still gloomy, but the tall and short figures had disappeared into the gray morning fog. With the sudden stop of the intensive explosions, the battle had indeed come to an end. At this point, Tang Yen's operation was a complete victory. Not only did he capture Zachary, the head of the Bounty Hunter Guild, but he also killed the elite team of the Temple of Light. It could be said that he was beating a rabbit in the grass, and no one was left behind. Of course, there were winners and losers. This matter was far from over for Sylvia and Owens in the mountains. At this time, the Knights of Light began to return one after another. They were the knights who had escorted Zachary away before. Although the members of the Grey Space led by Michaud had the upper hand, it was naturally impossible to kill all of the Knights of Light. Besides, there was no need to do so. "What? You were attacked and suffered heavy casualties? Zachary is also missing." "Well, as expected, as expected." Holding his forehead, Owens waved his hand and sent away the cavalry who came to report. His expression was complicated, and he smiled bitterly. At this time, the meticulous Owens naturally knew that they were under the opponent's calculation from the beginning to the end. It could be said that they were completely defeated. Sigh. With a sigh, Owens turned his head and looked around. He looked at Sylvia, who was sitting silently with her head buried in her knees. He shook his head slightly and walked over. He scratched his head and hesitated, sorry, and this time I dragged you down. To some extent, Owens was right. Although he had done his best, his strength was still slightly weaker than Sylvia. Therefore, their teamwork could not be perfect. It might not be obvious when facing a weaker opponent, but when facing twain, Owens became an out-and-out shortcoming and a breakthrough point. However, when Sylvia heard this, she bit her lip and shook her head. After a while, she slowly said, "It's not your fault. It's his strength that has improved." Don't forget, Sylvia had fought with Tang En before. In the previous month-long pursuit, her strength was obviously higher than Tang En's. It was precisely because of this that she was able to force Tang En into the northern wilderness. But she never thought that after just a few months, when the two sides met again, the strength of the other side would suppress her. Looking up, after the previous anger and killing intent receded, Sylvia's eyes were a little confused. Not boasting, Sylvia was a martial arts genius, this was an indisputable fact. But now, after seeing Tang En's abnormal speed of improvement, she was at a loss. There was actually someone in the world who could be reborn in such a short time. It was as if he had become a different person. Can I still catch up? Can I still kill him? Do I still have a chance to eliminate that devil's nightmare? After a moment of silence, Sylvia pursed her lips and slowly got up. Let's go. Where to? To the farm he mentioned before. Owens was stunned, his eyes flashing. Didn't you say that it was nonsense? Forget it, there's no need. Sylvia did not stop walking. During the battle, I pretended not to hear anything he said. But now that the battle is over, as a clergyman of the Temple of Light, I have to investigate. Rubbing his forehead, Owens was a little hesitant. Do we really have to go? Sylvia paused, narrowed her eyes and turned her head. Her expression was solemn, and there was a faint sense of danger. What do you know? Is what he said true? Of course not. I'm just guessing. Owen's expression was a little bitter. In fact, he already believed what Tang En said before. But because of this, he did not want to and could not let Sylvia know the truth. Owens was very clear in his heart that Sylvia was different from him. He knew some of the ugly secrets of the Temple of Light, and he could tolerate it because of the overall situation, and because once it was exposed, it would cause an immeasurable disaster. But Sylvia would not. She was a person who hated evil to the extreme. If he let her know these, the consequences would be unimaginable, but no matter how unwilling Owens was, it was obvious that he could not stop Sylvia from going to the farm now. Chapter 765. 2 days later, by the Hanshui River. About 100 meters away from Lena's alchemy laboratory, in front of a large house with tightly sealed doors and windows, a woman in a scholar's robe pointed at the surroundings and explained to the ordinary-looking young man beside her, "This used to be a few cloth workshops, but business wasn't very good. After I bought it in the name of the Yatong Chamber of Commerce, it became a place to produce weapons. Of course, on the surface we also buy some cloth as a simple cover." The young man smiled and nodded. "Haha, good idea. You're very thoughtful. I didn't come up with it. Your people came up with the idea. Usually, your people are responsible for guarding this place. This is the only entrance." Shaking her head, the woman extended her hand and invited the young man to pass through the newly built stone wall. She knocked on the locked iron door. "Uncle Fu, Uncle Fu. Uncle Fu is the guard of this first iron door. He's a good person. Oh, look at me. He's also from your secret organization. You must know him." As she spoke, an old man with white hair walked out from behind the iron door. He had a smile on his face. "Haha, Miss Lena, you're here. Lord Tang En, good morning." He quickly stepped forward and bowed. Needless to say, the young man and woman were Lena and Tang En, who had just returned. Waving his hand through the iron door, Tang En said politely to the old man who looked familiar, "Uncle Fu, you're welcome." "It's my pleasure, my pleasure." After bowing, the old man quickly opened the iron door. Lena smiled and walked in. "Haha, thank you, Uncle Fu." After passing through the iron door, Tang En looked at the high walls around them and nodded slightly. Lena seemed to understand his intention. She walked in front and said, "The security here is very tight. Other than you, me, and David, who came last time, no one else is allowed to enter or leave. Well, the production area is in front." Pause for a while, she continued. "The people in charge of production are also sent by the secret organization. They're very clever. Although they don't know much about alchemy, the weapon structure is very simple. They can basically make it after some training." "Oh, that's right, how's the actual combat power of the weapon?" Pausing slightly, Tang En tilted his head and thought about the farm that had completely disappeared and turned into a deep pit. He nodded heavily. "Very good, very powerful." "Hee, that's good." Lena's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled happily. It was unknown whether she was happy because her modification was recognized or because she could help Tang En. It was probably the latter. After passing through layers of guards, under Lena's lead, Tang En finally arrived at his destination, which was the place where weapons were produced. It looked like a huge warehouse. It was probably a combination of several cloth workshops, so the space inside was unusually spacious. As soon as he stepped in, all sorts of clamorous sounds of cutting, grinding, forging, and so on and so forth entered his ears, and it was extremely noisy. Tang En couldn't help but be stunned when he heard the noise and stood still. Lena on the side covered her mouth and laughed. She leaned closer and shouted, "Are you scared? I did it on purpose, hee. Every few dozen meters outside the house, there's a magic stone that silences sound. It's changed every day, so the sound inside can't be transmitted out." At such a close distance, Lena's loud shout was almost drowned out by the noise, and it became as soft as a mosquito's buzz. Tang En shrugged when he heard this. He didn't care about Lena's little prank. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and stared at the dense crowd coming and going in front of him. Most of them were young men with strong bodies. Some were waving sledgehammers to carve something. Their faces were red from the reflection of the furnace, and they raised their hands from time to wipe away the rain-like sweat. Some were running around with many small parts in their arms, and they looked hurried. Some were assembling with their heads down, and they looked focused. There were also a few people who seemed to have encountered some problems. They opened their mouths and shouted. They should be discussing, but it looked like they were quarreling. Tang En spread his hands and took a deep breath. The smell of rust, sweat, tung oil, and other unknown smells filled his nose. Tang En didn't care at all. Instead, his heart trembled, and he suddenly felt a great sense of pride. "Is this my military factory? It feels so good." Tang En had reason to believe that although no one knew about this weapon workshop hidden in the city, and although it was inconspicuous, it was destined to cause a sensation in Bran and shake the entire Shiza mainland. It was time to turn the page of this era. Tang En and Lena didn't stay inside for long. Although they were excited to see this scene, it was indeed not a suitable place to talk. However, although they walked out of here, the buzzing in their ears didn't stop and kept circling. At this time, Lena suddenly asked, "Have you thought about giving this weapon a name?" Tang En couldn't help but be stunned. He touched his nose and said, "I haven't really thought about it, but it's time to give it a formal name." "Well, what do you suggest?" "Me? I can't do it. This weapon wasn't created by me, so according to the unwritten rules of the alchemy world, I have no right to name it." "There's such a rule." Tang En was stunned. He scratched his head and said, "Didn't you participate in the modification? It's just a name, it doesn't matter." Modification is far from enough, and more importantly. Lena spread her hands and said helplessly, "I'm not good at naming." "Well, that's troublesome. What should I call it?" He rubbed his eyebrows and said, "Green Dragon Crescent Cannon? It sounds good, but it's not close." Thunderbolt cannon? It's quite loud but too tacky. Thunder God cannon? Domineering is domineering, but it doesn't sound good. Well, the Green Dragon Crescent cannon that killed Thunder God? Well, it seems that I'm not good at naming. Ha ha! Lena covered her mouth and bent over to laugh. Obviously, she was also shocked by the names Tang En came up with. Thinking about it, she couldn't expect too much from a person who could name an epic-making alchemy item, a washing machine. She waved her hand angrily and said, forget it, we'll talk about this later. At this time, Tang En's heart suddenly moved. He thought about it and said, Tisk, how about Purple Boar Cannon? Purple Boar Cannon? Lena blinked. But the inside of the metal barrel isn't purple. That's not a problem, it's just a name. Besides, it's easy to dye it. After a pause, Tang En looked a little sad. It's also a memento for someone. Yes, Tang En thought of Z, the genius who really brought this weapon to the world. But obviously, directly naming this weapon after Z was undoubtedly inappropriate, because this weapon was destined to bring many memories to the Bran in the future. Z was the Bran god of war, and now he had become the eternal monument of the Bran's guardian god in the eyes of all the people. Such a lofty honor was the so-called name in life and death. Tang En benefited a lot from Z, so naturally, he couldn't let Z's glory be tarnished because of him. After thinking about it, he could only choose one of the words, Purple Boar Cannon, Purple Boar Cannon. After repeating it a few times, Lena smiled and nodded. Well, although this name is a little ordinary, I have to say, it's much better than the domineering names you came up with before. Haha, I'll let someone add the dyeing process at the end. Haha, that's good. After finally settling on the name of the weapon, Tang En couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. He felt more pressured than the battle with Sylvia. After chatting for a while, the two came to the Iron Gate again. It was also at this time that Tang En thought of something. He rubbed his hands and looked solemn and hesitant. Lena, yes? Thank you. Well, I also feel that this thank you is very insincere, especially when you've helped me so much. But, I'm sorry, I really don't know how to thank you. Hearing this, Lena was stunned. Her clear eyes flashed with a trace of fluctuation, but it disappeared very quickly. The corners of her mouth rose, revealing a bright and beautiful smile. Just to say this, I thought it was something else. She tilted her head. Don't tell me you forgot? You've already given me a reward and remuneration. Tang En was stunned. Did I? Here. Lena smiled as she raised her right hand and shook it. Ding ding dong dong. On her wrist that was as white as jade, a multicolored bracelet made of corals, agates, crystals, and diamonds shone brightly under the warm light. The bracelets gently collided with each other, and the sound was pleasant to the ear like wind chimes. Tang En naturally recognized this bracelet. It was the item that he had bought at the Shanghai City auction house to create the image of a nouveau riche. But of course, Tang En had no use for it himself. He had originally wanted to give it to little Carol, but after some thought, he felt that it was a little inappropriate. After all, little Carol's age and cold temperament clearly did not match this extravagant bracelet. In the end, he asked someone to give it to Lena. He didn't have any other intentions. After all, he only had 2 girls by his side, so he didn't have a choice. Rubbing his nose, Tang En spread out his hands and said, Okay, as long as you like it. And, thank you, I like it a lot. Lena raised her head and smiled brightly. How could I not like something you gave me? Chapter 766. Noon, in a remote residence in Hanshui City. In an independent courtyard, the doors and windows were tightly shut. Bright light shone on the impure crystal glass, reflecting an amber-like magnificent color. Occasionally, a butterfly would be attracted by the confusion and stop temporarily. Perhaps it realized that it wasn't a petal, so it flapped its gorgeous wings and left again. Phew! Sighing faintly, Zachary's eyelids drooped slightly as he retracted his gaze from the crystal glass where the butterfly flew away. There was a hidden fear and panic in his expression, but most of it was still confusion, yes, he was at a loss. Zachary was sent here late last night. Originally, he thought that he would be greeted with rounds and rounds of torture until he would rather die than submit, or until he was no longer of any value after being tortured. Then, he would be silently killed. This was a very normal process. Ever since Zachary discovered that he wasn't killed on the spot, he had mentally prepared himself for this. Fear. Of course, he had these emotions, but Zachary was confident that he could take them lightly. After all, he had lived a good life with most of his life experience. Thus, there was nothing to be afraid of. But just as he was considering whether he should choose to die rather than submit and bring the secret to God or the devil, or to suffer less before death and obediently cooperate with the other parties questioning, it had to be said that this was a rather distressing choice. Zachary himself was also somewhat hesitant, but then he realized that things didn't go as he expected. Half a night had already passed. During this time, Zachary didn't close his eyes to rest, and no one came to interrogate him, let alone threaten him with torture. He felt as if he had been forgotten by others, just like this remote and independent courtyard, cold and cheerless, with no one showing any interest in it. Rubbing his eyebrows, the deep bags under his eyes also moved. Zachary was now vaguely regretful. If he had known this would happen, he would have had a good sleep last night. At this moment, there was a polite knock on the door. Is he finally here? Zachary's spirits were immediately lifted when he heard the sound. He sat up straight and maintained the demeanor of a big shot. Please come in. Creak. The wooden door was pushed open, and a young man walked in with a tray. The steaming hot food constantly emitted an enticing aroma. Zachary frowned when he saw this. He had seen this person before. Breakfast was brought in by this person in the morning. Obviously, this person was not here to interrogate. I'm sorry, I don't know your taste, so it's just some home-cooked dishes. If you have any dietary restrictions or preferences, please feel free to tell us. We will try our best to satisfy you. After putting down the food, the young man said politely with a smile on his face. Hearing this, Zachary was slightly startled. He lowered his head and looked at the dishes on the table. Although they were not very expensive, they looked, smelled, and tasted good. He opened his mouth, raised his head, and laughed at himself. The last delicious meal? Hee, I didn't expect that I would have such great influence. You're thinking too much. The young man shrugged and turned to leave without saying anything else. Wait, what are you trying to do? Zachary pressed the wooden table and finally couldn't help but ask in a deep voice, Are you trying to bribe me with this? I can tell you very clearly right now that I won't say anything. This was Zachary's probing. After all, the situation before him was too strange. However, the young man was not moved at all. He turned sideways and spread out his hand. Who cares? When he reached the door, the young man stopped in his tracks. He still didn't close the door. He turned his head and said calmly, By the way, if you feel too bored in your room, you can go to the courtyard to move around. As long as you don't leave here, it's fine. Of course, you can't leave either. Okay, I hope you have a good appetite and enjoy this wonderful lunch. After saying this, the young man disappeared outside the courtyard, leaving Zachary looking at him with a stunned expression. After a while, he shook his head inexplicably, picked up his knife and fork, and began to enjoy this wonderful lunch. At this time, on the roof, a chubby figure was lying on his stomach. He took out a pen and paper from his chest and muttered to himself, What the hell is this? You're eating and drinking down there, and I'm drinking up there. This is really... He shook his head speechlessly. Well, let me see. A fork in your left hand and a knife in your right hand. Okay, congratulations, you're not left-handed. You like to eat vegetables and have less meat. TSK, old people, you don't have that kind of appetite. Pity me. Yo, the way you eat is quite elegant, but it's too damn slow. As he talked, he waved his quill and wrote quickly. It seemed that he wanted to record every movement of Zachary, who was eating down there, in detail. It had to be said that this scene was a little strange. Although peeping at a beauty taking a bath was vulgar enough, one could imagine the reason, so it wasn't too exaggerated. But peeping at an old man eating, this behavior could no longer be described as perverted. It really couldn't be explained. In fact, as the cold wind blew from time to time, the pages of the book flipped. Some descriptions of sitting and walking postures could also be seen. The level of detail was simply astonishing. After about half an hour, the person on the roof stood up, gently closed the pen and paper, and covered the gap between the roof tiles. He raised his head and let out a long sigh. Damn, I've been eating for half a day. Are you trying to make me anxious to death? He paused and suddenly turned his head. Only then did he realize that a figure had already reached the roof. The figure waved his hand and walked over silently. Boss. His expression relaxed, and he also waved his hand to greet him. Haha, how was it, Harry? Did you get anything? Tang En walked over with a smile. His voice was controlled between the two of them. Here, it's all here. Passing over the pen and paper, Harry helplessly spread out his hands. Boss, I don't understand. What's the use of these trivial things to us? Moreover, if we want to know these things, we can just torture him directly. Shaking his head, he said, Haha, of course it's useful. You must know that when people are nervous, their actions will always be a little different from usual. Tang En took the paper, flipped through it, and nodded. Let's continue. We still have about 3 days. We must be clear about Zachary's work and rest schedule, daily habits, etc. This is very important. Pausing, he patted Harry's shoulder. This time, let's play a game of borrowing the chicken to lay eggs. It's very interesting. All right, I don't have any problems. It's just that. Harry pointed at his feet and grinned. Seeing him eat and drink so well makes me unhappy. Ha, be considerate. He won't have many good days. Tang En chuckled and shook his head. Well, how about this? 3 days later, I'll leave the interrogation of him to you. How about that? Wow, I think I can't wait. Haha, not to mention the meaning of borrowing the chicken to lay eggs, Tang En fell into a busy state after leaving this place. Since the production of the purple bore cannon had begun on a large scale, the alchemy materials needed were a big problem. Z was the commander of an army. Whatever he needed, regardless of whether it was illegal or not, he only needed to pass a command and someone would naturally deliver it to him. However, Tang En naturally couldn't do that. He could only operate through the black market, and not just through the black market of one city. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would be exposed. Moreover, once the weapon was made, it was undoubtedly impossible to just leave it in Han Sui City. There were too many variables. Therefore, Tang En had to arrange for people to transport it into the 100,000 mountains, pass through the layers of defense of Blank's army, and deliver it to Josiah of the Grey Coat army. Yes, these things could be solved, but it would take a lot of time. Moreover, because of the self-evident importance, Tang En didn't dare to let others do it. He could only do it himself. In addition to these, the farce of the secret manual worth $500 was fermenting rapidly. Tang En had to pay attention to it, also because of the strong suppression of the Temple of Light, the fake miracles, the various ugly secrets of the clergy, and so on. These incidents that should have caused a huge uproar were quickly calming down. In this way, as the victim's family, Tang En, of course, had to catch a few clergy as examples to publicize his plan and continue to slander the Temple of Light. What? Establish an assassin organization? Oh, this wasn't urgent, because there was a ready-made one waiting for Tang En to take over. P.S. Bowing to thank book friend JHT121 for the tip. Chapter 767. As Tang En busied himself, a week passed by quickly. Blackwood City, a small city in the north. There was nothing special about it. It was early in the morning. On the street opposite a small tavern in the western part of the city, an ordinary carriage slowly stopped. The coachman was a thin man wearing a wide-brimmed hat with his collar turned up. His face and age could not be seen clearly. It seemed to be a random stop. The coachman had no intention of getting off the carriage. The rear door of the carriage was still closed. After about 10 minutes, the coachman pressed down the brim of his hat and slowly got off the carriage. He walked cautiously toward the tavern opposite. The brim of his hat was slightly turned. He was probably constantly observing the situation around him. His body was visibly tense. He was like a mouse that had just left its hole. Once it realized something was wrong, it would immediately jump back. However, after slowly crossing the street, the coachman suddenly sped up and rushed into the small tavern in 3 steps. He stopped in front of the counter for a moment. Then, he was led inside by a waiter and disappeared through the back door of the tavern. Soon, in the backyard of the tavern. President, it's great that you're okay. Elder Luo and the others are all dead. 3 old men who received the news quickly walked out of the house and surrounded the coachman. They were either surprised or panicked. These 3 old men were the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild. When they received the news of Sylvia's arrival, Tang En did not have time to deal with these higher-ups who had split up and escaped. Taking off his wide-brimmed hat, curly hair and wrinkled old face, the coachman, Zachary, waved his hand with a gloomy face and shouted angrily, "What are you panicking for? They're not all dead yet. Let's talk inside." After saying that, he left these trembling old men and walked into the house first. After entering the hall and sitting down, Zachary's cold eyes swept across the 3 old men. He paused on the old man in brown clothes. The atmosphere was cold and solemn. He said in a deep voice, "The same mistake will not be allowed to be made a second time. Someone, bring me a pen and paper." Under the confused gazes of the 3 old men, a guild guard walked in with a pen and paper. Zachary pointed at the table beside him and said slowly, "Sit here. I'll talk and you'll remember. Not long after we parted ways, I ran into Sylvia and Owens, who came to rescue me. Then we headed south for 2 days, hoping to meet up with the reinforcements of the temple. In the end, right before the meeting, that damned assassin appeared again. The 2 sirs went forward to stop him while I escaped under the protection of the Knights of Light. But I didn't expect that we would be intercepted again." Zachary paused for a moment and a fierce and pained look flashed across his face. "I escaped alone and hid in the graveyard. Since I had no other way to escape, I could only dig up the dirt bag in the graveyard. I hid there for 3 days, then came out and wandered in the wild for 2 days. In the end, I entered Wild Stone Town 3 days ago and searched for information. This is my whereabouts over the past few days. If there's nothing suspicious, it's your turn now." The 3 old men were stunned when they heard this. They had successfully escaped at that time, so they naturally didn't think that Zachary would suffer such hardships after that. As for the meaning behind Zachary's words, they finally understood. Especially the brown-clothed old man, his eyes flinched when he heard this. At that time, it was because of him that the group of terrifying assassins found the mountain village, which directly led to the tragedy that happened next. This kind of mistake couldn't be made a second time. Next, the 3 old men separately reported their whereabouts after they separated. It was very simple and similar. After all, their escape was indeed very smooth. After a while, Zachary took the paper and quietly looked at it. From time to time, he asked about the location, witnesses and so on. It seemed that he didn't find any clues, so he slowly put it down and closed his eyes to meditate. The hall was silent. Although Zachary usually had the appearance of a kind and benevolent person, that was only in front of outsiders. The 3 elders were naturally aware of his temperamental character. They sat upright and still, not even daring to breathe loudly. Everyone. After a while, Zachary slowly opened his eyes. His face was gloomy like water. I have bad news to tell you. The reinforcements of the temple's elite team were completely annihilated. None of them survived. What? How could it be? It's over. The purpose of this group of elite team from the temple's headquarters couldn't be exposed, so their whereabouts were kept secret. The three old men didn't know either. Now that they heard this, they couldn't help but turn pale with fright and exclaim repeatedly, "Shut up!" With a stern shout, Zachary rolled his old eyes and stared around. I saw it with my own eyes. How could it be fake? The hall suddenly became quiet. Zachary rubbed his eyebrows, looking tired. I don't want to know how the other party did it now. I just want to know how we should deal with the anger from the temple. Do you have any suggestions? The three old men looked at each other. They hung their heads powerlessly and their faces were ashen. What Zachary said was undoubtedly a practical problem. This reinforcements from the temple's headquarters had many important people. Now that they were all killed quietly, it was naturally impossible to pretend that nothing had happened. More importantly, they didn't have a clue as to who the culprit was. They had undoubtedly become the temple's only punching bag. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this could very well lead to death. After a moment of silence, the brown-robed old man hesitantly said, since the whole team was wiped out, what if we say that we didn't see the other party from beginning to end? The other two old men's eyes brightened when they heard this. Yes, they knew that the team was finished, but others didn't know. In this way, as long as the temple couldn't confirm the death of this team, then naturally they couldn't blame it on them, but, stupid! Zachary frowned and scolded angrily. Did you forget what I just said? At that time, Sylvia and Owens were both present. They didn't die. Do you think they'll help us hide it? Of course not. The answer was self-evident. Why don't we hurry up and find those damned assassins? Are you confident? Then. How about finding a scapegoat? Good idea, he. Find a Motherf *Cur who dares to offend the Temple of Light. Do you believe it? All right, whether you believe it or not, King believe it. Ideas were constantly coming up, but they were quickly overturned. In the end, the hall fell into silence again. It was unusually oppressive. It was also at this time that Zachary exhaled and stood up. His face was expressionless. Since you can't think of anything, then we can only do this. Looking up in surprise, the three old men's faces lit up with joy. President, you have an idea? Come here. Zachary didn't answer. Instead, he waved to the guard who had been standing behind the table, trembling with fear, and pointed to the hall in front of him. Go there. Yes, it's there. Stand there and don't move. Zachary walked a few steps forward and patted the shoulder of the guard who had a blank look on his face. The corner of his mouth rose. You did well, very well. As soon as he finished speaking, Zachary suddenly stretched out his hand and instantly pulled out the sword at the guard's waist. He turned sideways and stabbed out. Pooh! Blood spurted out. The old man in brown tightly grasped the blade that pierced through his left chest. His eyes bulged and his expression was painful. Why, letting go of the sword hilt, Zachary took a step forward and hugged the old man's shoulder. His expression was sorrowful. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. People have to die, but you're the most suitable, he muttered in a low voice with sincerity. However, the two high-level old men at the side watched this scene unfold before their eyes. Their bodies stiffened and their expressions were wooden. They couldn't recover for a long time. After an unknown period of time, when the old man in brown's blood gradually dried up, Zachary let go and took out a handkerchief to carefully wipe the blood on his palm. He didn't even raise his head. Many of the guild's branch locations were destroyed because someone leaked the information. More than half of the people who went to negotiate were killed because someone cooperated with us from the inside. We were hunted down because someone brought the enemy over. The Temple of Light's team was completely wiped out because someone leaked the reinforcements' route and location. And not bad, it all makes sense. So, throwing out a blood-red handkerchief to cover the old man in Brown's eyes, Zachary's expression was calm. He's the traitor. All of this was secretly planned by him. And does anyone have any other opinions? Spreading out his hands, he half turned to look at the two high-level old men. The latter trembled and shook their heads. Very good, we agree. Dismissed. Chapter 768. As soon as he came back, Zachary used thunder to cut through the Gordian knot, showing what it meant to be temperamental. However, the two elders did not feel much sympathy for this result. After all, the truth was in front of them. The Temple of Light team was destroyed, and someone had to be the Temple of Light's punching bag. The brown-clothed elder who was involved in this incident was indeed very suspicious. Moreover, even if he was not the traitor, since someone had to be the scapegoat, this brown-clothed elder who caused more than half of the casualties was undoubtedly the most ideal candidate. However, as the two elders sat in the hall in a daze and considered the gains and losses of this move, they did not notice a detail. After Zachary went out, the paper that was originally placed on the table to record his whereabouts disappeared. Hiss. On the small path outside the hall, Zachary looked left and right, tore the paper, and threw it into the ornamental plants at the side. Then, he stretched. Ah, it's so easy to sneak in. It's really not challenging at all. What should I do next? He rubbed his eyebrows. Right, I need to borrow the chicken to lay eggs. The Bounty Hunter Guild is such a good platform. As the guild leader, I naturally have the responsibility to find a good owner for them. TSK. It seems to be more accurate to call it a turtledove occupying a magpie's nest. As he spoke, he walked to the end of the path and met a guard who was standing still. His expression became slightly serious. After thinking for a while, he walked over. Excuse me, where is the guild's trading information room? Over there, sir. You know me? Oh, thank you. Do well, young man. I have high hopes for you. Needless to say, Zachary's real identity was naturally Tang En. In terms of disguise, Tang En's level was enough to look down on the otherworld's thieves. Moreover, in order to achieve the perfect effect this time, he spent a whole 3 days observing and recording Zachary's every move and every word. Only then did he succeed in passing off the false as the real one. Of course, appearance, behavior, and other external things could be known through observation. However, it was absolutely impossible to completely copy a person's inner thoughts and memories. It was precisely because of this that Twain put on a strong front right from the start and demanded to check everyone's whereabouts with great fanfare. This could be seen as a classic example of playing the blame game and confusing the line of sight. However, the reason why Tang En spent so much time and made such thorough preparations was not as simple as deceiving the 3 remaining high-ranking officials. There were 2 purposes for Tang En to disguise himself as Zachary and come here. One was to use his identity to quietly swallow up some ready-made branch guilds and use them as the foundation of his assassin organization. The second was to find evidence of collusion between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. That's right. At first, Tang En wanted to directly destroy the Bounty Hunter Guild and establish his own assassin organization to take over this large, empty market. However, plans could not keep up with changes. Recently, he had encountered a very real problem. He was out of money. To be honest, this question made people a little speechless. Tang En had originally thought that the Yatong Chamber of Commerce's daily income would be enough to cover the initial expenses of the assassin organization. However, this idea was directly shattered with the appearance of the purple bore cannon. It was true that the purple bore cannon was a weapon of mass destruction and would inevitably play a pivotal role in the battlefield in the future. However, all this could not hide the fact that this thing burned too much money. The prohibited materials for the cannon body could only be purchased at a high price from the black market. As for the exploding crystals that were thrown out, it was an astronomical expenditure that was enough to make one's jaw drop. And the assassin organization was undoubtedly not as important as the purple bore cannon. Therefore, Tang En changed his mind at the last minute to capture Zachary alive and then disguise himself to directly pick up the ready-made ones. As for the second purpose, it was now imminent and urgently needed Tang En to settle it in a short period of time. It could not be helped. The relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild was obvious. If Tang En wanted to successfully open his assassin organization, besides destroying the Bounty Hunter Guild, he also had to attack the Temple of Light's influence in the north. Otherwise, his organization would not have a moment of peace. However, it had to be said that the Temple of Light's influence was too great. Some of the things that Tang En was doing now, such as forging miracles, exposing the ugliness and evilness of the clergy, slandering, and so on, could only slightly shake the foundation of the temple. To put it bluntly, it was only slightly better than scratching an itch through one's boot. Of course, this would not affect the Temple of Light, so he had to think of a way to be ruthless. Tang En set his sights on the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. One was holy and the other was dirty. If the holy were always dirty, then what kind of effect would such a strong contrast have? Tang En was looking forward to it, of course. Words were not proof. Everything had to be based on evidence. In fact, over the years, there had always been people like Raymond who protested against the Temple of Light, but these people were not as lucky as Raymond and often disappeared without a trace. The reason for this was self-evident. Some of these assassinations were done by bounty hunters when they accepted missions. However, there were also those with special identities, such as Raymond's father, who couldn't appear on the guild's mission board. The Temple of Light could only send out private assassins to assassinate them. What Tang En was looking for now was the records and evidence of these assassinations. There was no doubt that these records definitely existed. Otherwise, how could they be rewarded based on merit? From Zachary's mouth, Tang En had also confirmed that these records did indeed exist. However, according to Zachary, he was just a puppet. He did not have these records, and could only be stored somewhere in the Temple of Light. Tang En also believed this, but everything had to be seen. Therefore, after inquiring about the location, Tang En coughed a few times and walked to the guild's trading information room with a serious face. 3 days. Tang En openly stayed in this small city's guild for 3 days as Zachary. However, perhaps it was because of his crow's beak, but Tang En did not find any evidence of the records. Instead, he received a notice from the Northern Temple of Light headquarters, asking them to hurry over as soon as possible. Obviously, this was the rhythm of settling scores after the autumn. Unlike the other two elders who were worried, Tang En was a little happy because if this evidence really existed, the probability of it being in the Northern Temple of Light headquarters was undoubtedly very high. Meanwhile, while Tang En and the other two were preparing the car, in the Bounty Hunter Guild in Coldwater City, hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Jack, and I'll be the next leader of this guild. This is the transfer order. Oh, and congratulations on your promotion. In the secret room, a middle-aged man looked at the people who suddenly appeared in front of him and was stunned. Then, he took the transfer order doubtfully and opened it. After confirming the authenticity of the secret mark, seal, and so on, he could not help but look serious. Then, he browsed the contents of the transfer order and was overjoyed. Welcome, welcome. Waving his hand, the burly man called Jack had a serious expression. We came directly from the leader. The situation is urgent now and we need to take action immediately, so let's not waste time on pleasantries. Let's do the handover first. Oh, I understand. That's not a problem. The transfer order not only stated that this burly man would be the next leader of the branch, but also the content of promoting the previous leader's position. Therefore, although this burly man's attitude was not very good, the middle-aged man did not have any resistance and cooperated with him to hand over the vault key, specific work, and so on clearly. At this point, the burly man's serious expression eased slightly and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "The matter is urgent. I've just arrived and I've offended you just now. And I've already booked a table at the best tavern in the city. I hope you'll do me the honor and send me off as an apology." "Ha ha, brother, what are you talking about?" The middle-aged man was in a good mood and waved his hand with a smile. "Since you're here, naturally I should be the one to treat you." After such a delay, in the end, the burly man acted as the host and led the middle-aged man and a few people with some status in the guild away. After a while, when they arrived at a remote street in the south of the city, suddenly, boom! In a violent explosion, the carriage behind turned into a huge ball of fire and soared into the sky. Many of the windows of the surrounding houses were also shattered. Faint figures peeked out to sea, and they were stunned. "Hee, sending me off is not fake, but I'm afraid you won't be able to drink this wine." Looking at the wreckage of the carriage behind him, the burly man grinned and put down the curtain. Then, he took out a bundle of transfer orders and flipped through it. "Let's go to the next city." Chapter 769. If there were 10 lights in the world, 9 of them would be in the holy city of light. This was a sentence in the teachings of the Temple of Light, used to describe the flawless brilliance of the temple headquarters, the holy city of light. However, Tang Yin's destination this time was not the Holy City of Light, but the Northern Temple headquarters, Holy Light City, also known as the Little City of Light. It was just a reversal of the order of the words, but the scale of the two could not be compared. However, the Temple of Light was the Temple of Light after all. Even if it was a small Northern Temple headquarters, it was enough to make people feel emotional and shocked when seeing Holy Light City for the first time. It was undoubtedly the first time Tang Yen saw Holy Light City, so when the carriage arrived outside Holy Light City in the morning 5 days later, Tang Yen could not help but stare blankly when he lifted the curtain of the carriage. It was located on a plain surrounded by green water. Looking around, there were countless old buildings, high and low, arranged in rows. Because the outer wall tiles were only white and yellow, it did not look messy, but had a picturesque sense of beauty. In the middle of the buildings, there was a pure white oval dome, which was the tallest in sight. The design was like the stars surrounding the moon, and it was shining brightly. Holy Light City did not have the slightest luxury or delicacy. There was only a kind of heavy precipitation that came pressing down on his face. Not only was there a vicissitude of history, but there was also an indescribable sense of sacredness, which made people kneel and worship. After being stunned for a long time, Tang Yen came back to his senses. Even though he had always had a bad impression of the Temple of Light, he could not help but curl his lips and say to himself, "It looks good." Although it was Twain's first time here, he had done his homework well before. He knew that the Oval Dome was the Real Northern Temple headquarters, and it had been nearly 1,000 years since it was built. As for the surrounding buildings, they were believers of the temple who came here later and voluntarily settled down. Over time, it formed the present Holy Light City. It was worth mentioning that Holy Light City did not have a city gate or wall. In other words, one could enter the city from any direction. This design probably meant that it was open and aboveboard, all living things were equal, and it did not reject any believer. Not long after they entered the city, Tang Yen and the others had to get down from the carriage and walk. This wasn't because there were any rules, but because the buildings in the city were too densely packed, squeezing the space on the roads, making it impossible for carriages to pass freely. There were also various shops on both sides of the road, but there didn't seem to be a specialized commercial area. They were mixed in with the houses, and one could only barely recognize them by looking at their signboards. As Tang En walked among them, he turned his head and looked around. All he could see were similar peaceful faces. Most of them were dressed in long robes, and there was no trace of nervousness or anxiety on them. There was no sense of fame or fortune. Even the cat and dog sleeping in front of the door were squinting their eyes towards the sun, their expressions lazy and satisfied. Everything seemed so peaceful and calm. After walking for about 5 minutes, a gentle slope gradually appeared on the road. At this moment, suddenly, clang, 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 the sound of a bell resounded from afar, and it was melodious and mellow. When one heard it, one couldn't help but think of an old and mottled green bell. Pausing his steps, Tang En glanced around and found that everyone had put down what they were doing at the same time. They stopped and stood quietly in one direction with their eyes closed and one hand on their heart. Their expressions were infinitely relaxed and peaceful. The whole street was quiet at this time. Only the distant sound of the bell could be heard, which rang every few seconds. A layer of gauze-like solemn atmosphere gently pressed down, not stained by dust or smoke. Unexpectedly, Tang En also couldn't help but close his eyes. His brows furrowed slightly at first, and then gradually smoothed out. The bell rang a total of 9 times, about a minute from start to finish. After the sound of the bell, the noise of the rustling started again. Those who should be walking walked, and those who should be talking talked. Everything returned to normal. Phew! After letting out a long breath, Tang En slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was somewhat aghast. Damn, is this the power of faith? I was almost brainwashed by purification, of course. This was not just the power of faith. Humans were social animals. As long as they were still in the world, they would inevitably be affected by the surrounding environment, the emotions of the people around them, and so on. The only difference was the degree of influence. And this was Holy Light City, the gathering place of all the strong believers. If one stayed here for too long, it was almost inevitable that they would be affected or even assimilated. At this moment, Tang En began to understand Sylvia's way of thinking and style of doing things. Anyone who grew up in such an environment would be like this. President? And? Under the repeated calls of an old man, Tang En came back to his senses and shrugged. Sorry, I thought of something and got distracted. And let's continue. It's okay. The old man shook his head and sighed with understanding. Actually, every time I come here, I also feel a little bit. I feel that I'm too dirty, and I don't fit in here. Tang En chuckled. Hee, we are indeed dirty, but that's because we often wipe the dust on the surface of the light. Someone has to do that, right? The old man was stunned when he heard this, and then his face was full of admiration. President's insight is thorough. I admire you. Ha, that's nothing. Don't forget, I'm a great philanthropist of Shanghai City. They chatted like this for about half an hour. During this time, they passed through countless streets and finally arrived at the bottom of the oval vault. The real headquarters of the Northern Temple looked like a palace from the outside. Of course, it was not the luxurious kind, but an ancient building that coexisted with grandeur and history. After arriving here, Tang En purposely fell a step behind and watched as the 2 elders walked around the main hall with great familiarity. It seemed that they were going to enter from the back of the temple. From this, it could be seen that the Bounty Hunter Guild had always been a puppet in the eyes of some big shots of the brilliant shrine. They could order it around whenever they needed it, and abandon it when they didn't. At the side door at the back of the temple, the few Knights of Light guarding there seemed to be familiar with them. After the old man explained his purpose, a Knight of Light nodded and went inside to report. After waiting for a few minutes, Tang En raised his eyebrows and felt that the atmosphere around him was a little strange. After observing for a while, he found that the Knights of Light who were quite enthusiastic before had an ugly expression on their faces. Their gazes were very unfriendly. The two old men were a little timid and looked at him from time to time, as if they were a little confused. What's going on? Just as Tang En was puzzled, the Knight of Light who went in to report brought a middle-aged clergyman in a white robe with an indifferent expression. Glancing at them, the middle-aged clergyman waved his hand and said in an impatient tone, "Come with me." After saying that, he turned and left. Tang En and the others naturally did not dare to delay and hurriedly passed through the side door. When they passed by the Knights of Light, they could clearly hear a few dissatisfied snorts. More than 10 steps away from the side door, Tang En's sleeve was gently pulled. He turned around and saw the old man with a puzzled expression. He asked in a low voice, "President, why didn't you give some money to those knights this time? If we offend them, we'll have a hard time the next time we come." "Damn, why didn't you say so earlier?" Tang En's mouth twitched a few times when he heard that. He suddenly understood. Previously, under Harry's interrogation methods, Zachary was indeed very cooperative and answered whatever he was asked without hiding anything. But some inconspicuous small things, such as coming here to ask for filial piety, and so on, not to mention Tang En, even Zachary himself would not remember it. Ahem, I was a little worried just now. Well, I was distracted. This is my mistake. We'll make up for it later when we come out. The old man suddenly understood. He thought that Zachary was worried about whether he could successfully withstand the wrath of the temple, so he was distracted and made a mistake. At this time, Tang En finally understood. He touched his nose, walked a few steps quickly, and came to the middle-aged clergyman's side. He said politely, "Sir, please pass the message back and forth. This is a small gift. I hope you don't mind." With a flick of his sleeve, a few large gold notes were stuffed into the clergyman's palm under his robe. Stopping, the middle-aged clergyman turned his head and looked at him. His indifferent expression was greatly eased in an instant. He smiled and nodded, seemingly satisfied. Seeing this, Tang En returned a humble smile and sighed softly. The strange feeling of restraint in his heart, because of what he had seen and heard since entering the city, disappeared instantly. Damn, assimilation of faith, brainwashing, purification. They are all weak. Sure enough, the human heart is the way of the king. Greed is the way to go. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.